morning, and thank you all for coming today. We want to kick off 2010 by introducing a truly magical and revolutionary product today.
From Relay FM, this is Connected, episode number 24. This week's show, this week's special episode, is brought to you by our friends at Igloo, an internet you'll actually like. Lynda.com, where you can instant stream thousands of courses created by industry experts. For a 10-day free trial, visit lynda.com/connected. And Automatic. Drive safer, drive smarter. My name is Myke Hurley, and I have the absolute pleasure today of being joined by my colleagues, Mr. Stephen Hackett. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, guys.
And Mr. Federico Viticci. Federico, big day for you today.
Hey, guys. Yeah, I'm so excited today. It feels like it's the episode I've been waiting for.
I'm starting to wonder if, like, the iPad, like the anniversary of the iPad should just be your birthday.
Yeah, I was just about to say, this is like doing a special episode about my birthday.
It's like the Queen of the United Kingdom. She has 2 birthdays. Like, she has, like, her official birthday and then a birthday that she just celebrates. So maybe you should have that.
Wow, she's lucky.
Because she can?
Just because she can, yeah. So January 27th should just be Federico Viticci Day. That's what
I like it.
So today, of course, we are celebrating 5 years of the iPad. Long-time listeners of the three of us may remember that on the iPhone's birthday, episode 30 of our previous show, The Prompt, we did a kind of play-by-play and a recap of the iPhone's introduction on its anniversary. And here we are today. After 5 years of the iPad, we're looking back at the iPad's introduction. And we're going to talk about that a bit today.
So when you built this OS, this multi-touch gestural OS for fingers, you didn't do it in a tablet right away. You did it in the phone. What was did you consider doing a tablet when you did the iPhone, or was it just a natural progression? The iPhone came out, it was a big hit.
I'll actually tell you kind of a secret.
Okay. Okay.
I actually started on a tablet first.
Really?
And I had this idea of being able to get rid of the keyboard, type on a multi-touch glass display. And I asked our folks, could we come up with a multi-touch display that we could type on, I could rest my hands on and actually type on. And about 6 months later, they called me in and showed me this prototype display. And it was amazing. And I gave it to one of our guys. This was in the early 90s. Early 2000s.
Yeah.
And I gave it to one of our other really brilliant UI folks. And he called me back a few weeks later, and he had inertial scrolling working and a few other things. Now, we were thinking about building a phone at that time. And when I saw the rubber band, inertial scrolling, and a few of the other things, I thought, my God, we can build a phone out of this. And I put the tablet project on the shelf because the phone was more important. And we went and took the next several years and did the iPhone. And when we got our wind back and thought we could take on something next, pulled the tablet off the shelf, took everything we learned from the phone, and went back to work on the tablet.
So that clip is from June of 2010. So about 6 months after the iPad was introduced, but only 3 or 4 months after it had actually shipped. And it's interesting, Apple, especially the Steve Jobs Apple, wasn't big on telling like behind the scenes stuff or historical stuff. But then you have Jobs talking about in this interview that an internal team was working on a multi-touch keyboard, and they decided to put it on a shelf and use an iPhone first, and then come back to it. It's a very interesting look, kind of behind the curtain a little bit, and one that I think is pretty interesting. That he's willing to say, hey, you know what, like this, we had this idea, it spawned this other better idea for the phone, and then after the phone came out, we decided to circle back to this. So I think that's really fascinating.
Do you think that he intended to tell that story?
I don't think Steve Jobs was tricked into saying anything.
No. Like, not that he was tricked, but like he decided on stage, like, I'm going to tell this story. Or do you think like he'd planned ahead to tell it? I just wonder, like, because it just seems so. he might be doing a good job of it, but it just feels like really off the cuff. He's like, "Oh, I'll tell you a secret."
He seemed like the kind of guy who would decide on stage to tell stories to people. Yeah, I agree. We don't know. There's also this article from 2008 about the iPhone from Wired. It's a very popular article about how the iPhone blew up the wireless industry. And basically, according to the article, in 2005, Steve Jobs felt really confident about building this phone from this multi-touch technology that some team at Apple had been working for a tablet PC. So we get a little more detail from this article about just the timeline, because Steve Jobs he says in the early 2000s, according to Wired, that was going on in 2005 when he saw the first prototypes of multi-touch, and he decided to keep working with multi-touch, but on the phone. So about 2 years of development time between the first prototypes and the final iPhone.
Seems crazy fast.
Yeah.
Because Apple bought a company, didn't they? Fingerworks.
Yes.
Which I think had a lot of this technology that they then put into this device, whatever it's going to be. So I think that like looking at that process is so interesting to me. Like in that clip, like Steve says, and the phone was of a higher priority at that time, so we decided to put it on the shelf. It makes it sound less magic because it's kind of, we worked out a new business priority. And I don't know, there's just something about it. And it was like, but doesn't Apple just like make things with like unicorns and stuff? Like you have business priorities and product roadmaps. And it's like, no, Steve, you're a hippie.
This is also when Apple is working with Motorola on the iTunes phone, the rocker.
Yeah, man.
So
yes.
Never forget, boys, never forget.
It's not like Steve isn't thinking about phones. It's just maybe they realized that the Motorola iTunes phone was really,
pretty bad.
I'm pretty sure, Stephen, do you have a rocker in your closet?
My brother had its sequel. They did one called The Sliver, I think, that had the same thing. Yeah, the Sliver 7. Shockingly, I've written about the rocker. But it was so bad. And, clearly Apple, there is that idea, I think, when we look at Apple, that sometimes like these things are just sparked into life. But very clearly, like for Steve Jobs to say, "Oh my God, we can do a phone with this," like that idea, like that had to have been percolating somewhere, even if it was just within Steve Jobs' brain. And we know now due to the book and some other things that there were multiple phone projects, and one was kind of iPod based, and one was kind of more of what we came to know as the iPhone now. And very clearly this work by this team on this multi-touch is what set the course for so many things. I mean, even the MacBook Pros that are sitting in front of us and the MacBook Airs, they even use multi-touch in the trackpad. Very clearly this technology has just spread and was so obviously, in hindsight, so monumentally important to the last decade of Apple products that that we've enjoyed, but it's interesting, and now currently we're talking about this 12-inch MacBook Air, but leading up to the tablet, there was a whole bunch of reporting on rumors and people hearing things about the iPad, about the tablet project. I mean, all the way back to like 2001, right, Federico?
Yeah. So I've been collecting all the rumors that led up to the announcement of the iPad. So I started going back in time basically and reading all these old articles and reports and rumors. So this is before, just to offer some context. This is before the huge popularity of the iPhone. This is before the iPhone in many instances, and this is before the Apple rumor scene sort of evolved into the next level with 9to5Mac and Mark Gurman and all these names.
Like the rumor scene then was just like people just predicting for a lot of it, right? It was like, this is what I think will happen. It's not like it is now.
Yeah, it's before 9 to 5 Mac. It's before all these different components coming up of China every day, basically showing photos of Apple devices. So in 2001, as Stephen said, Kevin Fox, I think the guy used to work at Google, he had a post about basically a future Mac tablet, which was kind of the idea, right? Because there were Windows tablet PCs, and of course people were saying, yeah, Apple should do a Mac tablet. So is predicting basically that Apple will do this tablet running OS X with no CD drive, but with dual speakers, USB ports, and 5-hour battery life, wireless connectivity. It'll cost $1,000. So these are pretty much standard speculation. What's really interesting that it's that 9 years before the actual iPad announcement, Kevin Fox used the name iPad in his theories.
It's crazy.
Kind of surprising. And I confirmed by going back with the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine. It's not that he changed the post, in 2010 just to pretend that he's cool and is like a wizard. He actually did use the name iPad. So congrats to the guy, I guess.
You know what he does as well? Like, he even does the Apple thing, right? He doesn't call it's like meet the iPad. It's like meet iPad.
Yeah.
Like that the way that they name them that I hate so much.
Yes.
Like it's
the worst.
too weird. It's too weird that he was able to do this.
Yeah.
Because so much of that is spot on, and it's so far before. Crazy.
Yeah.
He
9 years.
even gets the resolution of the original screen right. I mean, it's
crazy.
this guy might be able to time travel. But you remember in 2001 too, like this is not that long after the Newton met its demise. The Newton was canned in February of 1998, and yes, I knew that before looking it up.
Tattooed on his inside bicep.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it's to say that it's going to be a Mac tablet. The Newton ran Newton OS, totally different operating system from the classic Mac or OS X. And 2001, the transition to OS X is well underway. For him to say, hey, it's going to be a Mac tablet, not only is that impressive in hindsight, but he's saying, you know what, it needs to run OS X. It does not need to run this crazy like Newton OS that had all these weird paradigms and handwriting recognition and like crazy stuff. I mean, the Newton still is like insane, some of the technical details, but he's saying this needs to be a Macintosh that is a tablet, which is a thread, like that Mac tablet thread follows these rumors through the next decade.
And in a way, the iPad will run OS X. But still, 2002, Steve Jobs' interview with the International Herald Tribune. This newspaper is asking about tablet PCs, and Steve Jobs says that he doesn't believe, he's not sure that tablet PCs will be successful. And he says, this is really interesting actually. He says that the tablet PC market has turned into a notebook where you can write on. And he asks, do you want to handwrite all your email? So it's not that Steve Jobs is dismissing the idea of the tablet entirely. It's basically saying the current crop of tablet PCs, they're just like notebooks with handwriting features.
Yeah, like the Newton was.
Yes, exactly. It's interesting because
he canned it. He canned the Newton.
Yes, and of course we couldn't find the original link to the interview, but there's a Mac Rumors article from 2002 because Mac Rumors has been
around
writing for a long time.
So, like, to set the scene of this, like tablet PCs at the time, they ran like a modified version of Windows XP, but for all intents and purposes, it was just Windows XP, and it just had like an inbuilt touch recognition. But the touch, the touch screens, all the touch interface was resistive touch screens. So they all needed styluses to use with any efficiency. And they used like handwriting recognition in some instances to like turn writing into text. But, we all know how bad that's always been. Like even today, it's hard enough to get it to work, that kind of stuff. So in 2002, it was even worse.
I kind of want to handwrite my email. Just see what happens.
You should just write all of your email in paper and just send people PNGs. Just like you just get handwritten notes from you.
You know, a friend of mine, we were talking a few days ago, and he told me that he got a job for this guy who basically doesn't use a computer, and it's basically his assistant now. And he told me that this man wants his email to be printed on paper. So when he needs to reply to email, he prints out the email from the computer, and he brings the email to this person, who handwrites a response at the bottom of the sheet of paper, and then my friend has to digitize the response into the email app.
Your friend has a terrible job.
Yes, I told him that. Yeah, it sounds really awful.
He's a computer butler, basically.
Yeah, basically, yes. So 2002, 2003, I'm just going through these rumors, guys, because there's a whole lot of rumors here. Ian Betteridge talking about an article that made the rounds in the Apple blog scene. It was an article originally posted by Matthew Rothenberg, and basically the author was suggesting, again, a Mac tablet running OS X. And according to this specific rumor, Apple was going to use the Inkwell technology. That I'm pretty sure, Stephen, you know this. macOS 10 Jaguar, Inkwell was the handwriting recognition system created by Apple.
It's again, it's Newton based.
Okay, so there's according to this specific rumor, coming in Macworld 2003. It's an 8-inch iPod, basically, that runs OS X. So, yeah. 2003, Robert Cringely. This is a well-known name. There's the link of the original post at pbs.org. According to Cringely, it's going to be, of course, another tablet from Apple. And he says the tablet PC killer app for the mass market is functioning as a digital hub. He has a bunch of theories about this Apple tablet being connected to the living room with the Macs and iPods. And according to Cringely, it's coming at Macworld 2004. So
he was way ahead.
Yeah, it was. Anyway, I don't want to poke fun at these guys. It's just context.
Well, I mean, because we have 8 years of knowledge on them. But what's what's interesting about that article in particular is, the digital hub was a strategy put forth by Steve Jobs in the early 2000s that the computer, and his argument was the Mac, was going to be the digital hub of things like music, photos, and video. And so that was sort of the banner under which iLife was introduced. And say we have FireWire, so you can put your home camcorder in here. We'll have a link to the video where Jobs announces that. And so to say that the tablet is going to become that just a few years after Jobs said the Mac was going to be it is, sort of like buzzwordy in hindsight. But even today, there are articles recently saying that, hey, iOS is becoming that, or the cloud is becoming that. And so that digital hub one just kind of jumped out at me a little bit as being an interesting conversation piece.
There will be an incredible amount of links for this week's episode, and if you do want to follow along, either check your podcast app of choice or point your internet browser over at relay.fm/connected/24, which is where you will find those links.
2004, guys, and it's the time for patents. And of course, as with any new Apple product, the company files just any idea they have. The first instance I could find in 2004, a filing made in May of that year for a handheld computer, and the filing has sketches of what looks basically like an iBook, which used to be Apple's line of computers, not the ebook reading app that we'll cover in a bit. It looks like a notebook without the body of the computer. And
it's totally a mod book, bro. We love the mod book, our friends.
Oh yeah. It's Stephen's favorite device. So just to offer more context, this is the time when in 2004 when Steve Jobs is downplaying rumors of a new Apple PDA, and where everybody, as we said, is talking about this OS 10 tablet coming with FireWire and USB ports but no CD, because people have actually been talking about the death of the CD for a long time. So that part of the rumor scene was accurate. There's not going to be a CD drive in the Apple tablet. 2005, more patents from Apple. There's sketches of people holding a tablet. It looks like a thick iPad. So there's that. And 2006, more patents, this time for Apple multi-point touchscreen tablet patent. And also another one about gestures. So I found this one interesting because there's a bunch of gestures in this filing that actually ended up in the iPad. There's a pinch open, pinch close, and then there's of course other crazy stuff like a dial interface that basically you put the fingers on the screen and there's a dial that you rotate. It's like a software version of the click wheel, or and I'm sure Stephen you will remember this. There used to be an old Mac app called Sapiens. Do you remember that? It was like an application launcher with like a dial on screen. And it was, I think, free and open source, maybe. Anyway, it's like a software click wheel. So we never ended up getting that.
Man, I love the pictures, the drawings of the fingers in this. It's so weird. Like, what is that left hand doing? Like, it's wrapped around and there's like an additional finger coming in from the other side. Like, what is going on?
It's just hanging out, man. Yeah.
2007, Chris Messina, a mock-up of what the Apple tablet could be. So this is after the iPhone. So at this point, we're starting to see these weird mashups of Apple tablet concepts running OS X and also parts of iPhone OS. Some sort of hybrid device. According to Chris Messina, he's been thinking about this new Apple tablet, and it is going to feature a pure software keyboard. And there's I managed to find his original gallery of mock-ups on Flickr, and a couple of things that I found.
You're like a detective, Federico.
It's also called creeping. A couple of things that I liked. He's arguing about dashboard widgets based on CSS and web technologies. So yeah, we only had to wait, for iOS 8 to get widgets, and also dashboard. LOL. Am I right, Stephen?
Hey.
And there's a mock-up. Guys, of Coverflow. Remember that guy from OS X?
I have no idea why Coverflow still exists. Like,
is there still Coverflow? I generally don't know whether Coverflow is still around.
Yes,
it is. I actually didn't know either, so I have a Yosemite machine in front of me.
God,
and it does still exist, and it's still terrible.
It's only useful for scanning through images in a folder.
Why does this exist?
No, thumbnail view is way better.
Maybe.
So I don't know if you remember this, but at one point ASUS helped Apple making the tablet.
I do remember this.
This is 2007, an article from cnet.co.uk. So this is from your people, Myke.
Mm-hmm. We get all the best scoops.
Yeah, ASUS is helping Apple making the tablet. So we arrive in 2008. There's from Apple Insider rumors of a Safari Pad. This is again after the iPhone, so after people have seen a mobile version of Safari running on smartphones, and the iPod Touch also. Let's not forget the iPod Touch. According to this particular rumor, it's the Apple tablet or the Safari Pad, as they call it. It is going to be a big iPod Touch, and it looks like, according to this article from Apple Insider, the New York Times reporter who inquired Steve Jobs about this tablet project at Apple, it sounds like Steve Jobs snapped at this guy because he asked this question instead of asking about the MacBook Air. So also a bit of gossip. Sounds really interesting. 2009.
I like the name Safari Pad.
Safari Pad, yeah,
you could see where it came from, because even we're going to get to it, but even in the keynote, most of the time they're looking at software, he is looking at Safari, and kind of the pitch is, you have the internet sort of right here, and so you could see how Safari Pad kind of could come into someone's mind.
Internet communicator, bro.
Exactly.
And also, again, people 2 years before the iPad already saying it's a big iPod Touch. So, it's not like it came out of nothing. April 2009, Steve Jobs is now on medical leave from the company, and the Wall Street Journal says that Apple is working on new iPhone models and also a new portable device that is smaller than laptops, but also bigger than the iPhone and the iPod Touch. Also, this is probably my favorite part of this entire compilation of rumors. May 2009, Gene Master, way before his obsession with the Apple television, he said that the Apple tablet, which many other pundits and rumor blogs were saying it was coming later in 2009, Gene Master actually predicted that the Apple tablet would cost between $500 and $700, and that it was coming in the first half of 2010, so the following year. And I was really happy for Gene in reading that he was once correct.
Maybe this is why like anybody still pays attention to him today, because that one
Just
time,
one time.
he nailed it. And he might do it again. So,
I mean, if you keep saying the TV's coming, at some point, could be right.
Yeah, Federico, did you check that he hadn't said that every year since '94 though? Like, I just want to double check that.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't.
So who knows? He could have been saying it for ages.
Right after Gene Master, I want to talk about this other analyst called Stephen Hackett.
Not familiar with that guy.
Discussing the Apple tablet. Stephen, do you want to tell me what were you thinking about? Because you were actually correct. It's not like you're making crazy predictions here. It's just you sound a little old.
I do sound a little old. Because the idea of running OS X on a touchscreen, like there are things that are attractive about that. I think to this day, especially dealing with some of the more powerful applications, like something like Adobe Illustrator, where there's not a real, there's not a real alternative to that on iOS. There's some things that kind of get there, and so that was, I think, my thought at the time of, it'd be great to see OS X apps, but the reality, like I said in 2009, was that this is going to run App Store, and at the time, 2009 App Store equaled iOS App Store apps, and so yeah. But again, like I think someone put in the show notes that I was sort of hints at, again, the idea of being an iPod Touch, a bigger iPod Touch, having the same functionality of the iPhone as opposed to the Mac or even something in between.
Yeah, because you were saying I'm already taking my iPhone with me in meetings and other. I'm doing work stuff, so
right.
If I can have a bigger screen than the iPhone, it's going to be even better. So yeah, the idea was accurate. So now I'm going to start using precise dates, because these are the months and the weeks leading up to the iPad announcement. September 28, 2009, iLaunch, talking about the Apple tablet. They say it is going to be called the iPad. It is going to be a 10-inch device. There's going to be different models for 3G and Wi-Fi, and it'll run iPhone OS. New York Times, October 5, 2009, talking about the tablet PC market in general. According to the New York Times, Apple has been working on this Swiss Army knife tablet since at least 2003. So even before the 2005 date that Wired reported in the article. But basically, these tablets that Apple was making were they had problems with the battery and the performance wasn't good. So they were using PowerPC microchips made by IBM initially, and the New York Times has details from these previous Apple engineers, and according to multiple stories they report in the piece, one that really stands out is that Steve Jobs commenting on commenting on tablets. At one point at Apple, he asked, whether tablets were any good besides surfing the web in the bathroom. And, yeah.
To be fair,
They are really
I don't know
good
about
for
you
that.
guys, but my iPad is really good at that. Just saying. Just throwing that out there.
So, as usual, Steve Jobs, visionary. Late 2009. This is really when rumors start intensifying. Every day there's a new rumor. Every day there's a new theory. I was around. I just started writing Mac stories a few months before. So I was really into, this whole let's follow Apple rumors thing. And it was crazy. December 23rd, 2009, just before Christmas, Boy Genius claiming that there's going to be 100% a 7-inch iPad, a 7-inch tablet coming definitely next year. So that this is kind of awkward. December 29th, 2009, islate.com, a domain name registered by Apple, is found. And it's found, of all people, by this teenager called Mark Gurman. So this is his first scoop about Apple rumors on Apple devices. It's interesting because a lot of people were saying, yeah, it's going to be Isolate. It's going to be the name of the device. And of
What do you
course,
guys think? Yeah, what do you guys think about that name?
Isolate.
Isolate.
Yeah.
I don't think.
I've always thought it was weird.
Yeah, but I mean, we can maybe talk about this later. But I still don't like iPad. But I actually don't think iPad is much better than Isolate.
Yeah.
I think neither of them are very good.
Didn't Microsoft respond by announcing a bunch of Slate
They did.
Slate branded tablets, but then they didn't go anywhere? Like,
Yep, I think it was HP stuff at a CES. They did it twice.
Yeah.
They announced it, and then the next year announced it again because it never shipped.
yeah, I've got a link to a Gizmodo talking about it. That's like you pivot and use that name, and then I wonder if Isolate was the name, and then Apple changed it. It's interesting to kind of think about what could have been there.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Same day, December 29th, 2009.
Big day for rumors, man.
Yeah.
That was the day.
Great day. I found a clip from a news segment on TV, MSNBC. Let's just play the clip.
Let's talk about Apple. What are you hearing about this new tablet, Isolate?
We've been going back and forth on this whole tablet idea for at least 6 or 8 months now. There's always new rumors, new ideas, new speculation. The latest is that they're going to have an event in late January where they may or may not unveil this tablet, which may or may not be a 10-inch kind of touchscreen device that may be kind of a big iPod Touch or kind of a stripped-down tablet-sized MacBook.
Federico Viticci, huge fan of MSNBC.
Yeah. I mean, I'm watching every day from Italy.
Cataloging for
Yeah.
future use.
So you can see it's just a big iPod Touch already. It's a thing, as people were saying. It's going to be just a bigger iPod Touch, and there's excitement and all that. But people want to understand what the tablet is going to be, and a big iPod Touch makes sense to people.
Are we going to talk about the big iPod Touch thing later? Because I have opinions.
Save your opinions for later.
You keep your
Michael.
mouth shut, boy. This is my rumor segment.
I'm almost done. I promise. We're getting to the main event. Daring Fireball. I don't know if you know this website.
No.
John Gruber had 2 really nice articles about the iPad, and as it was called, the Apple tablet before the announcement. And John, as usual, was correct in saying that the tablet was going to be Apple's reconception of personal computing. So yeah, this is when speculation about the iPad was really, really strong and intensifying every day. And John also talks about, is the iPad going to run Flash? Is the iPad going, Safari and plugins and all this other stuff? We're going to talk about it later. We enter 2010, January 8th. After the holidays, the New York Times is back with rumors, and they say that the Apple tablet will have lots of gestures because according to conversations with several former Apple engineers, Apple has been working on this new and they say somewhat complex new vocabulary of finger gestures to control the tablet. And as you said a few minutes ago, Myke, it seemed like these gestures were going to be powered by the acquisition in 2007 of a company called Fingerworks. And according to the New York Times, there's going to be an Apple event at the end of the month. And of course, 10 days later, on January 18th, 2010, Apple sent invitations for a media event to selected members of the press. And the invitation read, "Come see our latest creation." There is a copy of the invitation graphics at Engadget, and make sure to read Joshua Topolsky's theories about the meaning of the invitation. That's always funny. CBS, January 27, 2010, the morning of the Apple event. Let's play the clip.
You can see what we think we know here, a 10-inch touchscreen, very thin, book reader with movies, TV, and music, $600 to $900. An internet provider could be Verizon, could be AT&T. We're hearing a lot of speculation on both.
Potentially open up to more people.
But, we're going to wait and see this afternoon, as they say.
All right. And then maybe we'll know a little bit more, that we can really pick your brain.
Apple's going to have to shock and awe with this one.
That guy. Like, who is that guy?
What you don't see, what you will not getting from the podcast, from this audio, is the mock-ups that he decided to show for the iPad. So this is just a few hours before the event, and he decided to show this crazy mock-up of an iPad with a weird keyboard. And actually not an iPad, an Apple tablet with this weird keyboard and all these different theories. And he says, yeah, people have been having fun with Photoshop.
Well, like, he shows one with a scroll wheel. And, like, at this point, we have the iPhone. We know that we don't need a scroll wheel anymore. Like,
that's the best part of it, really, I think, is that mock-up.
You know what's really strange? It's that 13 hours before the event, the iPad actually leaked. There were pictures taken, we don't know by where or how. Pictures surfaced on these Chinese forums. I think the forum board was weiiphone.com. And it was pictures of these iPad units into some kind of enclosure, like some sort of security enclosure on a desk running the Google Maps application.
Man.
And this was crazy because I remember clearly I was on Twitter. I was waiting for the Apple event. Engadget, I remember. In fact, I used the Twitter link from Nilay Patel back when he used to work with Joshua Topolsky at Engadget. When he tweeted, and people were saying, yeah, this is it. And it's so weird because there's the Apple event in 12 hours, and we have pictures of what really looks like an Apple tablet. It's got this curved back, it's made of aluminum, and it's running this bigger but also different version of iPhone OS. And it was crazy. I remember, like, people on Twitter and on Apple blogs before the event, this was crazy.
I'd bet that this is coming from people that were testing, like the demo companies, like the companies like EA or whatever that come on to demo. Because, like, it's all locked down, right? So it's like, because you don't need to see it. Because we've heard stories like that in the past, right? Where they just kind of take you in and they hide the way that it looks and they just lock it down and all you can see is this screen. Like, I can't think of where it's come from off the top of my head, but I know that there's been stories like that,
It kind of looks like if the Army built an OtterBox case for an iPad, like, this is what it would be.
Yes.
I mean, the thing, like, if you got to click on this link, it's like in a metal iPad sandwich, and it has, I don't know, 24 screws holding it down. Like, it's really crazy.
I love that they screw it like that because it's like, are they leaving anybody in the room on their own with that? I don't think so.
Well, my favorite part about this in hindsight is that it has an iPhone 4 sitting on top of it.
Yes. Oh my God, so good. Yeah.
I mean, very clearly, like, now that we know what the iPhone 4 would look like, Clearly not a 3G or 3GS sitting on top of this device. Very clearly an iPhone 4. So, maybe it was a pre-production in the factory type thing, but that's well before the iPhone 4 shipped. So it's...
Where's the iPhone 4? I don't see that. Oh, yeah, there it is. That's crazy.
Yeah, no,
it's
let
really
me tell
nuts.
you this story. Let me tell you this. Back when, because a few months after this, Gizmodo did the whole we bought the stolen iPhone 4 thing. Remember that story?
Yeah, of course it is.
So when Gizmodo posted the original article, this is the iPhone 4, it took like people a few days, and then I don't remember who did it, but basically someone on Twitter was like, actually, remember the old iPad pictures? There was the iPhone 4 in there. So people realized after a few days after Gizmodo ran the piece, and it was just crazy. These iPad pictures, it was like a whole story with consequences, and people kept talking about it even with the iPhone 4. So yeah, I would pay. I think I would pay not much, because I don't have the kind of savings, but I would pay to know like the story behind these iPad pictures. And
let's wait for the follow up next week and see what happens.
Yeah, we'll probably get some crazy story about secret agents and stuff like that.
It's the army, bro. It's the army.
We're now at the point where people are waiting on Twitter, people are following live blogs, and there's going to be an Apple event, and there's going to be Steve Jobs and all the Apple gang walking on stage and to announce we don't know what. There's a colorful invitation graphics. There's banners at the Yerba Buena Center, and yeah, this is the context. This is the rumors and the theories that Apple was about to either confirm or deny.
The stage is set.
Yeah.
All right, so let's take a moment to thank our first sponsor, and then we'll get in and talk about the keynote. This week's episode of Connected is brought to you by lynda.com, which is used by millions of people around the world to learn awesome things. Lynda.com have over 3,000 courses on topics like web development, photography, visual design, and business. All of their fantastic video courses and tutorials are taught by experts, and new courses are being added to the site every single week. You'll get unlimited access to their already existing and completely growing library when you sign up at lynda.com. Why would you want something at lynda.com? Well, let me give you a few scenarios, if you will. Maybe you're looking at this year, the year ahead, and you're thinking, I want to get a new work-life balance, or I have a hobby that I always wanted to learn, or maybe I want to get into podcasting, maybe I want to develop an app, maybe I want to find a new job or improve some skills that I already have. This is what lynda.com can help you with. They have something for everyone. You'll get unlimited access, and you can view these on your computer, on your tablet, on your mobile device, with their apps for iOS and Android. So, of course, you can watch them on your iPad if that's something you'd like. And you're listening to us today, we're talking about the iPad, and you're thinking, I have that great idea for an iPad app. Well, this is what lynda.com can help you with. They can maybe help you learn iOS app development. They can help you with Swift training. They can help you with a whole course on how to go from start to finish of developing an iOS app. Or maybe, don't tell anyone, maybe you want to learn how to develop Android apps too. Well, they have all of that. Maybe you want to go cross-platform with that new fantastic idea of yours. Well, they can help you with Android apps as well. I mentioned Swift a moment ago. They have courses on comparing Swift and Objective-C. So Lynda can help you with how to start looking at taking your current Objective-C app and putting it over to Swift. But then maybe you're going to need to learn all the design stuff too. They have courses in Illustrator. They have courses on Photoshop. Then maybe you want courses on how to market that app. Well, you can do all of that. You can do everything. Lynda.com is awesome, and they're going to have what you want. So do something good for yourself right now and sign up for a free 10-day trial to lynda.com by visiting lynda.com/connected. Thank you so much to lynda.com for supporting this show and Relay FM.
We want to kick off 2010 by introducing a truly magical and revolutionary product today.
Watching this keynote again, when we were preparing for this, I had a jolt of emotion, and it was an emotion that I remember that I had at the time, because Steve Jobs comes out on the stage and he looks like a completely different person because he'd been away for a long time. Stephen, how long had Steve been away?
I actually I was looking up the timeline. I couldn't really piece it together, but I didn't look all that hard either. But 2010, he's been in and out at least once.
For the music event in September, I think.
I think that's the event where he comes out on stage and there's a slide that says "Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated," which is like pretty awesome. And he puts his blood pressure at one point up on the slide. But yeah, this is sort of in that era of, Steve had been sick and what we know now, was sick again.
Because people are starting to get worried now, right? Like this is the time. I think he'd been on. Was he on his like extended leave of absence or whatever they call it at that point?
It's before this, but yeah, this is all kind of in that time period. And Myke, I had a very similar reaction. In fact, I rewatched I've watched the keynote about a week ago and rewatched it last night with my wife, and I told Mary, I was like, it was weird for me to watch this, not only because I hadn't watched any Steve Jobs video in a while, I had forgotten some of his mannerisms, but very clearly was having a hard time with some stuff, but that doesn't that's immediately tamped down by the fact that he's so excited. He is into the meat of this event in 6 minutes. He's obviously pumped very clearly. Like we saw with Tim Cook this past year with the watch. The watch is very clearly Tim Cook's baby. The iPad was very clearly Steve Jobs' baby, and you see that written all over his face the second he starts talking about it.
Yeah, because it's as we've learned from the other clips and the other stuff we've been talking about, the iPhone was a fantastic success, and he'd brought that to the fore. But the iPad had been Steve's idea years and years before, So it's for him, it's finally I got this out there. And as well, we don't know what his state of mind was like at this point. He may have been, understanding what was going on in his life, and I know this is a bit morbid, but kind of happy that he was able to get it done,
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
I know it's a bit strict,
I love how every time, and this is, I guess it's especially noticeable when it's a big event. He walks on stage and he sets the tone for what the day is going to be like, and then he's like, "I've just got a few updates." And everybody's chuckling because everybody's waiting for the main announcement, and he's got slides with numbers, and it's always funny.
Which most of these numbers, iPod totals, number of stores, it's kind of funny now to see how much Apple has grown. But I when I watched this for the first time last week, I literally laughed out loud. He's showing a picture of an Apple store, and he's like, it's before it's open. He's like, it'll never look this good again. Just the idea that Jobs really liked the stores until people were in them and ruined them. It's really made me laugh.
Yeah, because it's wow, you guys why can't we just leave them closed? People just look in them.
Yeah, it's a really pretty museum. I think the most interesting one to the three of us, at least, is at this point, about 18 months after the App Store had launched, had just passed 3 billion downloads with 140,000 apps in the store. Federico, do you know what those numbers are currently? How many apps are in the store?
1.4 million apps. I'm not sure about the number of downloads.
Yeah, so move that decimal point over in that number.
Yeah.
It's weird too to think about. We'll get into the software in a minute, but how early this really was in the App Store. The first iPad shipped with iPhone OS 3. I mean, the iPad really, in hindsight, came pretty quickly after the phone, and I think these numbers kind of reminded me of that a little bit.
Yeah, it was the second generation of the App Store is what it shipped with, because we got the App Store in OS 2, and so it's quite interesting to put that into context. The App Store hadn't been around very long. It was doing well, but it was new.
Right.
And so many people were saying, "Oh, we don't know if the iPad is going to launch with an App Store right away," because people had the precedent of the iPhone, which launched without an App Store, which was released as a software update after developers had the time to actually buy an iPhone and test the SDK on it. And so I remember a few people were saying maybe we won't get an SDK right away, and we will have to buy an iPad and just actually test software on a physical iPad. And other people were saying no, because Apple learned from the past. They're going to offer development tools right away, and we will just have to figure it out in Xcode.
Because really, the App Store didn't ship until it shipped alongside Mobile Me and the iPhone 3G. So I mean, it wasn't until that we had the second hardware, the first hardware revision, I should say, until we got the App Store, and that's one of those things that we look at these things in hindsight, and that sort of thought of, it won't have an App Store on day one, like very clearly in hindsight, a dumb idea. Yeah. You look and see where Apple was, and now it's easy, right? It's easy to sit here like years later and say, well, clearly the trajectory, was that it would have had to have an App Store. What is interesting, though, in this part of the keynote, I want to see what you guys think about this, because having watched this a couple times recently, this part still like rubs me the wrong way a little bit. So Jobs is up there, and he's pitching that Apple is the biggest mobile device company in the world, and he counts iPhones, iPods, and then MacBooks. So he says, most Macs are laptops; those are mobile devices. Because of that, we're bigger than Sony, Samsung, and Nokia.
I don't know why he felt he needed to do this. It's like puffing his chest out and making up numbers. That's effectively what he did. Because it's like, well, you can put an iMac in a truck, so it's kind of mobile as well. Like, it's kind of, I don't know, I think it's kind of, I don't know why they felt they needed to do it. Like, they felt like they had to legitimize themselves in some way on that day.
I think that's why. I think that he did it because he wanted to say, we're the biggest mobile device company, and that automatically gives legitimacy to the tablet that I'm getting ready to introduce. But I still... and this is not a metric, I've watched a lot of Apple keynotes over the years. This is not a metric that Apple ever uses again. Like, he says it this one time. In my mind, it doesn't really land very well. And, Apple says, later on, hey, we're the most profitable smartphone company. We have more mobile devices than anyone else. But never again does he link the Mac to this like mobile device category. Yeah. And it's, I don't know, it just was weird to me in hindsight, rewatching.
And it kind of irritates me that is talking about the Mac as a mobile device instead of a portable device.
Yeah, it's a technicality. He's trying to make a number on a technicality.
Yeah, but it just feels like he's trying to make a point and to force this point, because, hey, we are bigger than these companies. And to me, it feels like one of those things that Steve Jobs, because he's from the old guard of people in the Valley, they want to compare to these other companies and just like reinforce the fact that Apple is in the big leagues now, and they can go against Sony and Samsung and Nokia.
But like the thing is, in 2009, if there is a set of companies that Apple doesn't need to compare themselves against, it's these ones. Because like at that point, none of these companies have credible answers to the iPhone.
Especially Samsung.
Exactly. Well, Nokia.
I was going to say, especially Nokia.
Nokia is the real trailing one.
Yeah, but at least they still sold a whole lot of phones.
Yeah, they did. But it's like if you were looking at what was the future, you're looking at what's the... Yeah, but Samsung had a lot of... They did pretty well with cell phone sales, the same as Nokia did. Obviously nowhere near as good as Nokia. But it's just so weird that he felt he had to like...
It's weird.
Mm-hmm.
But it's... He kind of makes it past that, and we get to the event itself. And I noticed when watching this, it was about 6 minutes into the event, which is about how long it took Tim Cook to get to the iPhone 6 at the Watch event, blowing through the previous stuff and getting right into the topic. And I, for one, I love the reveal here, with the iPhone, very famously, it was the three things that were really one thing, the widescreen video iPod, the internet communicator, it's all one device, and here, like, we have the image in the show notes. It's it's a quote from the Wall Street Journal that says, "Last time there was this much excitement about a tablet, it had some commandments written on it." There's a picture of Moses holding the 10 Commandments over his head with lightning shooting out of them. It's a kind of a funny way. It's like, hey, this is what we're going to be talking about today. And I think the longer he's gone, the more I realize that Jobs had a sense of humor when it came to this sort of thing. Like when the iPhone 4, was, the Gizmodo thing, he says, "You think you've seen this? You ain't seen this." And he plays the Song a Day song with Antenna Gate. And there is sort of a level of playfulness here. And again, I think that goes to that Jobs is genuinely excited about this product because it has fingerprints all over it. So he goes in, and Steve Jobs knew I'd be watching, and so he goes back to 1991. So he says, we're going to do a tablet, and then the next slide is a PowerBook from 1991. And he says, Apple invented the modern laptop, which is interesting. Remember, in 1991, Jobs isn't at Apple, Jobs is at Next. And he starts talking about these interfaces that Apple has pioneered. And he remember he does the same thing in the iPhone keynote. He talks about the mouse, he talks about the click wheel, and then he talks about multi-touch. And he kind of does it again here, but in a little bit of a different way, which is interesting. How did that hit you guys? Neither of you were born in 1991, I don't think. So
I know.
I think I enjoyed the parallel to the iPhone keynote in this regard, because I think what it does, and I think the reason it worked then and the reason that it works now, is it shows that Apple is a company that is about refining and perfecting. So showing, we looked at our historical devices, we looked at the things we've done in the past before we started thinking about what we would do in the future, because we took what worked and we took what didn't, and now we've made a better product out of it. Because it's like I like that through all of these big product announcements, that Steve did with the iPhone and the iPad, he was drawing a lineage back to everything he's ever learned, and it's like, this is all of my experience to date has allowed us, and all of our experience to date has allowed us to create this product. And I like that.
I will say last week I tweeted that I miss trackballs, and people were like, trackball users are crazy. Don't mess with those guys, because they're like, no, trackballs are awesome. I have one on my desk.
What's the name of those old laptops that used to have a little nub?
ThinkPads, man.
Yes.
ThinkPads. They still have them.
They do.
Oh yeah. They still make them? Oh god.
In my old job, I had one, and I had one of the little what are they actually called?
Track point.
Yeah. So I had a track point, and it had a track pad. This is so confusing.
Wow. Can I tell you guys a secret? Just me and you and the
okay.
many people listening.
Okay.
I really like ThinkPads, and I really like the track point. And if I were to run Windows, I would own a ThinkPad.
Well, ThinkPads were always the best. But the one that I had, the trackpad worked terribly. The track point worked amazingly, and I used to use it every day.
It's super fast because you don't have to move your hands from the keyboard but down to the trackpad.
Yep,
it's cool.
It's nice.
Anyways,
it's
so
gathers up speed on it. It's awesome.
This was actually an episode about the post PC era.
We're going post PC.
Okay.
Back to PCs again.
So he moves from that. So like you said, he sets the stage of, look, we know what we're doing. We've been doing this for a long time. We have pioneered all this stuff. We are standing in a wealth of history. And he goes into sort of this conversation of the categories. So he sets the stage of, we have smartphones and we have laptops, and everybody has a laptop and everyone has a smartphone. And is there room for a third device? And he lists off some tasks that a third category of product would have to be better at.
Everybody uses a laptop and or a smartphone. And the question has arisen lately, is there room for a third category of device in the middle? Something that's between a laptop and a smartphone. And of course, we've pondered this question for years as well. The bar is pretty high. In order to really create a new category of devices, those devices are going to have to be far better at doing some key tasks. They're going to have to be far better at doing some really important things. Better than the laptop, better than the smartphone. What kind of tasks? Well, things like browsing the web. That's a pretty tall order. Something that's better at browsing the web than a laptop? Okay. Doing email, enjoying and sharing photographs, video, watching videos, enjoying your music collection, playing games, reading ebooks.
So I don't know about you guys, but Steve Jobs reading a grocery list of features isn't nearly as compelling as the pitch for the original iPhone.
It's not as epic. That's for sure, I think.
Yeah. And these things, so he says, internet, email, like this whole list of, like, I think it's 7 things. He says that a tablet would need to be better at these things to be a viable product. And he uses those as the springboard to talk about the iPad and to talk about specifically why tablets are better than netbooks.
I think for me, this is this list of features is the part that feels the oldest in this. Like when I see the slides and when I'm seeing Jobs talking about categories and specific features, it feels like it was a long time ago. And like it feels like it was an age before the explosion of smartphones, like in popularity and like I guess of mobile in general, because this feels like it's trying to find all these different tasks that people want to do, and it feels like it's a bit limiting, because people want to do everything, not just these 7 features. And like there's some stuff that feels old to me. Like when he's talking about enjoying your music, he doesn't say listen to music. He says enjoying your music collection. And that like yeah. you hear that and you go, yeah, that's before music streaming. That's before all these other services that you use today. So even if 5 years is not a long time ago, in mobile, I think, and especially for Apple, it feels like a decade ago, like 2 decades ago. It feels like a long time, and I think this list and this slide and the way that he presents these features, it feels really old.
It does, and he moves from these categories and he says, well, what about netbooks? Netbooks are what some people say are the solution, and he has an answer for that.
If there's going to be a third category of device, it's going to have to be better at these kinds of tasks than a laptop or a smartphone. Otherwise, it has no reason for being. Now, some people have thought that that's a netbook. The problem is, netbooks aren't better at anything. They're slow, they have low-quality displays, and they run clunky old PC software. So they're not better than a laptop at anything. They're just cheaper. They're just cheap laptops. And we don't think that they're a third category device.
Yeah. And so again, this is something where 5 years on, like netbooks, we know now that netbooks are already fading, that the iPad in many ways killed them, even though Chromebooks are kind of a thing.
Now we have the Chromebook, so...
Yeah, I've got one.
Back, baby.
I got one right here, actually. And he attacks the speed, he attacks the bad screens, and he attacks what he calls clunky desktop software. So what Jobs has done in this section is he has set the bar for what his tablet needs to do software-wise to be a success, and some hardware things that could set it apart and set it above netbooks. And I think, at least, while the overall sell, I think, is weaker, I think that he answers all these points as we move forward.
But we think we've got something that is. And we'd like to show it to you today for the first time. And we call it the iPad.
I mean, I kind of already showed my hand at this a little bit, but I remember at the time thinking, like, man, the iPad, like that just... And I know there are all those jokes, and I don't really think we need to go into that, but I just don't think the iPad says anything. Like, that name, it says nothing. Like, iPhone is like, okay, I get it. It's like iPhone. And then, like book, you kind of get it, like MacBook, iBook. There was something about it. Like it made sense to me in a way. Like it's kind of like a book. Like what? Well, like a pad of paper? Like what are we calling as a pad here? Like, I don't know. I don't think slate was the right term. I think it was interesting when you brought up Federico, when John Gruber, like I believe he thought it was just going to be called the tablet, right? The Apple tablet.
John Gruber and I think other people also really liked the idea of Apple Canvas as a name.
Canvas is actually quite nice. And I think if this was today, it would be called something like that, because Mr. Cook's regime is moving away from right? You've got like Apple Pay and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think like if it was today's product, it might be called Canvas is a great name, actually. Mm-hmm. I think it shouldn't have had I think even then it was maybe that was a bit long in the tooth at that point. So the name now, it's like the iPad is the iPad, and it's like the name means nothing. But even today, when I think about it, when I think about that name, I'm kind of turned off by the name.
I think it's one of those things that I've sort of settled into it. I hated MacBook Pro as a name, and now it's MacBook Pro with Retina display. Like, that's a whole sentence. That's not a name. But, as things age, you just kind of get used to it.
Yeah.
I do think, guys, we need to take a moment here, and we need to recognize someone who was in the crowd. Fist pump guy, if you remember from the iPhone keynote. I think he was sick, maybe, or he wasn't around, but his cousin... Fist pump guy's cousin, he was here.
Whistle guy.
I happen to have one right here.
So the guy, this is, Jobs is showing it for the first time. And I, at least, and I think Myke, you were as well, I was a little underwhelmed.
Yeah. So, right. Okay. There is nothing this device could have looked like other than what it looked like. Like there is nothing. Like this is how it needed to look. But the thing that I really didn't like the look of was the bezel or the bezel. I think it's called bezel.
The bezel, yeah.
The bezel. That was really thick, like crazily thick. And I know that Apple kind of made a reason for it, but I think in later years they've shown that they don't believe that was ever true, I think. And it's kind of like, this is all we could do. Your iPad right now has like a piece of paper between the screen and the edge. Like that thicker a bezel, but I don't think is needed.
Why are we calling it that?
It's Massachusetts, man. Got to keep up with the jokes.
It's the correct pronunciation.
They sold it as where you're going to put your thumbs, right? Like, but they have been able to slim it down first on the iPad Mini and then on the iPad Air, because iOS can now sort of ignore accidental input. Yeah. And so I think it was a thing where if they could have done it software-wise, they would have.
But what about the iPhone at the time then?
But I think the other...
He's just ignoring my question.
I am.
But the iPhone at the time didn't have bezels that were that thick.
But you hold it differently, I think.
Yes,
I don't think so.
That's what I'm trying to say. And
more of your thumb is on the screen.
I think that part of it is that the iPad, and in this keynote, they show the iPad can be held in any direction.
Myke, why don't you like the bezel?
I just think it was too thick, man. And I think that designs today have shown that like Apple agree with that. But anyway, I also didn't like the way that the home screen just looked like a big iPod or an iPhone, and the space is huge between them.
I would like to register a complaint.
What? Why?
Can I register a complaint?
Yes.
To this day, the very day, the iPad does not keep your icons in the same place when you rotate the screen.
Yeah.
So if your Instapaper icon is all the way on the right and then you turn it, sometimes it's on the left on the next row, and that drives me insane.
Bro, if you think that's bad, you need to take time for 6 Plus, right? So 6 Plus, you've got 4 icons across the top and then 7 down the side. When you rotate that, right, imagine what happens then. You've got 7 across the top and 4 down the side. It is literally impossible to remember where that's going. It's
I mean, like,
crazy.
I'm not a computer scientist or I'm not an engineer, but like, it really bothers me, and I don't know, and you know, all throughout this, like, Jobs is rotating the device. Like, in almost all the demos, he says, "This is what it looks like in portrait. This is how it's in landscape."
Can I just say one thing, guys? I'm sorry, because today, I mean, we have the iPad Air 2, and we've had like 5 years of iPad, and we say that the iPad was really thick. But if I remember correctly, a lot of people were impressed with the thinness of the original iPad back then.
Sure.
And if you read all the reviews, they're like, the iPad is super thin, which, like, it's doesn't make any sense today because we have all these new devices.
Yeah.
But I think back then, like, some people, Myke is correct, some people were complaining about the size of the bezel and like it's too wide, and you know, those sorts of complaints. But the thinness of the device, I think it was like people were impressed, I think.
Yeah, and I think part of this is that we've seen in 2010, we've seen, you know, 3 iPhones at this point. And we kind of understand that iOS devices are a screen, and then like everything required to power the screen, but nothing more. And so the fact that the iPad was relatively simple looking, you know, I read a bunch of reviews of the original iPad over the last couple days, and all of them are like, it's really like minimal. There's nothing here that doesn't need to be here. And that, I think, leads to some of this of like, you know, with the original iPad and every iPad since is kind of boring to look at, but that's not the point. The point is that it's the screen and everything happens on the screen. And it's all about the multi-touch glass, and the rest of it is just has to be there. And so that's the part that Apple keeps shaving off. So we're going to come back to the hardware, but so Jobs shows it up, he holds it up, shows it, and then he starts to talk about it. And the brilliance of this keynote, and the reason this keynote stands out most in my mind, is the way that Jobs demos the iPad is in a big, comfortable chair with a little table next to it. You know, it's not standing at a desk. He's not walking around the stage like he is with an iPhone or an iPod, but he is sitting in a chair. His feet are up, and he in that very like simple change to his presentation style, he is conveying so much about what Apple viewed. How Apple viewed the iPad. As you know, as someone has said, it's not a lean forward device; it's a lean back device. And I think Jobs wanted to portray that this is a relaxed thing. You don't have to be hunched over your desk. You're not clutching it in a hand as you walk down the hall, but you're at home and you're relaxed, and the tablet just kind of sits in your lap and you can hold it, and it's a very intimate device, and that's a word that he comes back to as he moves through some of the software stuff.
There was an intern's life that was made hell for like a month trying to find that right chair, man.
Oh, I guarantee it. Yeah, that guy like rage quit.
The original iPad was too heavy to hold it with one hand without your leg behind it, so he's using his legs as a prop for the iPad. I think that's really smart. In hindsight.
Sick burn, bro.
I mean, it was heavy.
It was heavy.
So.
It was heavy.
Yeah, so he gets into basically right off the bat, he starts with mobile Safari, and in hindsight makes obviously a ton of sense. And even in the iPhone keynote, they spend a lot of time on Safari saying, hey, look, this is the whole web. This is not some like janky browser on a BlackBerry, but this is WebKit. This is the internet, you know. And he starts on that with the iPad, but in hindsight, it drags out a little bit.
Yeah, so we all had to watch this video in preparation for this show, and we all had to endure watching this, so you now get the pleasure of listening to it.
And here we are, right at the New York Times. You can see how fast it is. And I can just scroll around here and look at the whole front page of the New York Times. Anywhere I want to go, anything I want to make bigger, I can make bigger. If I want to go into a story, I can just touch it. And I go into that story. Back to the front page. And so I can browse around the New York Times so easily. It's really great. I go down here. You know? See what's happening today? And again, just so easy to go into a story like this. See the photographs, read the story. It's that simple.
During when I rewatched it last night, my wife watched part of it, and I think this is about the time that she just got up and went to bed. Like it's so painful.
Welcome to episode 1 of Steve Uses the Internet. It's just the worst. It's the worst.
What's really convenient is that is using this idea of holding the internet in your hands, which is like a recurring theme in the whole keynote. But what I don't like in hindsight, in looking back at this video, is that it is saying you can look at an entire web page using the iPad, but of course in practice, once you got the device, in the demo Steve was using an iPad. Showing the New York Times website, and it was not a Retina iPad because it was the original iPad with standard resolution screen, and is like zooming in and out of the web page. So if you try to read something like the New York Times on the original iPad in portrait mode with no Retina screen, it wasn't really super comfortable to read. And you had to double tap to zoom into, like the small text on the Times webpage. It makes for a good demo because the camera shows the iPad from a distance. But if you try to read the small text in practice, you need to pinch and you need to double tap to zoom. So I think Apple is clever, to show a whole web page. In portrait mode, because it was the full web page.
Yeah,
it just wasn't super comfortable to read.
What's interesting in like comparing this to the way that they introduced this with the iPhone is when they were saying, you can see the full web. What they were talking about was it's not WAP, right? It's not this like an internet that doesn't look anything like the internet. And then when they're showing off the iPad, what they're battling against is horribly designed mobile navigation. Like the fixed navigation before responsive that people would do, where they'd try and spoof it to look like an iPhone app.
Oh my God!
That's what we're battling against. The real web is not that, right? So that's kind of like just an interesting thing. Is like originally Apple's battling against WAP, and then later they're battling against themselves.
Yeah, right. A whole website in the palm of your hands is what Jobs says on more than one occasion. It's even in the Johnny Ive, Scott Forstall White Room video later.
The 25-minute long video.
Oh,
you mean?
Gosh, yeah, it's super long.
8 whole minutes, man.
So we see Safari, and then Jobs gives us a tour of the built-in apps. So we see Mail, Photos, Calendar, Contacts, Maps, YouTube, and Videos all shown off. And if I could be honest with you guys, it was all so boring, I didn't even make any clips for the show. Like, it's weird, right? Because they have to build the case that the iPad is easy to use, but they can't rely on iOS to sell that for them because we already know what iOS can do and what iOS looks like. And so what Jobs is doing in all of these apps is showing how it's different than the iPhone, but again, not as compelling because we've already seen this stuff. We already have iPhones in our pockets at this point.
Nothing was different enough that it heralded people needing to go crazy over, right? And not that there's anything wrong with that, because part of the beauty of the iPad was you'd already trained iPhone users like that. That's the reason that it runs iOS, right? It didn't run iPad. It ran iPhone OS.
I think Jobs even says that. Like, we already have 100 million people who are going to know how to use this.
Because they could have made an iPad OS, and it probably would have been better suited to the iPad, and it would have thought about it in completely different ways. But
they had that Newton OS laying around.
Exactly, you could just strap up the inkwell and let's go crazy. But that wouldn't have been a very good idea. But what it does is it leads to kind of like a demo, which when you're showing off the kind of the universal, or what was then universal kind of applications that Apple made, it kind of dragged on a little bit.
So many people thought that Safari was the killer app on the iPad because it was so impressive that it let you see a full web page, And like, there's a review from Topolsky at Engadget. There's Jason Snell. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this guy.
Who's sorry?
Jason Snell.
No.
I think he used to drive around Cupertino at the time. He also reviewed iPads and iPhones for a website called Macworld. So he said, the Safari was like just something different in holding a web page in your hands. So people were impressed with Safari, and I actually kind of, it was ironic in seeing the Flash plugin errors in the keynote, like Steve casually ignoring the Flash boxes in the Times and other websites.
I think it even gets a chuckle at one point. Like he scrolls past one and people are like,
he's like smirking.
Flash.
Yeah. But the other software, I think you guys make a good point, because it was nothing terribly innovative, like original, I mean, of course, it's got a calendar. Of course, it does mail, and of course, it lets you see more stuff than the iPhone because the screen is bigger.
That calendar, man. Oh, yeah. When it came up, my eyes nearly fell out.
Hold on. So it kind of looks obvious, Of course, it does these things, but also maybe like the same argument that you go, of course it does this. Maybe it's also a benefit, because it should do these things. And now I don't know if our perspective is being altered by the fact that we know iOS 7 and this new design, and now iOS 8 with all these new features, and we look at this stuff and we're like, yeah, it's boring. And it's difficult for me to remember exactly the feeling that I had when I first saw, the calendar and mail. I remember that I was impressed with Safari, especially because it looked impressive. It was not super readable, and I needed to zoom into web pages to see actual text. But I was impressed. And the demo in the keynote is just too long, I think.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, can you please finish? And I think it's like the same feeling that you get when they invite developers on stage from other companies to demo stuff. So the only advantage here is that it's Steve Jobs, so he actually manages to entertain people in a way. But even if it's Steve, it's still, I think, too long and boring.
You know what it felt like? Like, when at WWDC they show off they show off Mountain Lion, and then they have an event like 3 weeks later where they show off Mountain Lion again, right?
Yes. Oh my God, why are you doing this?
In case you didn't see this, guys, let's just run through the exact same demo we did 3 months ago.
Right. And there's in hindsight, two things really struck me. And one, we mentioned earlier, that he rotates the iPad at least a lot more than I do mine. But there's also a lot of silence in this demo because, like you heard a couple minutes ago with the browsing, that's true throughout these. He's tapping on things, he's showing things, and he's sort of letting the iPad speak for itself. But it again, this whole section, and thankfully it's almost over. We're going to be in hardware soon. It doesn't land well for me.
Yeah, I understand like the way you feel, because in considering like how I felt at the time, I think I today I have the same thought. Like, I'm not sure about like the software that I'm seeing here, but also like I try to go back and read like original like first impressions after the keynote, and a lot of people, in spite of the silence, right, in spite of like this section feels weird, thought that we all have, I think. A lot of people reacted to the keynote as saying, yeah, the iPad's strength is that it becomes like the device becomes the app that you're using. So the calendar makes the iPad turn into a physical calendar. And when you're using Safari, you're holding a web page. And when you're doing mail, you're doing that kind of stuff with messages, like there's paper sheets. Like the software, we think it's boring today. At the time, it made the iPad, even more than the iPhone, it made the iPad feel as like a device that can become multiple things. And Myke, for me, I think, and for us, that you know when on virtual we talk about Kirby.
Yep.
The Nintendo character. So Kirby is basically nothing. It's like a pink blob. And the peculiarity of Kirby is that it can absorb enemies to turn into different characters. Like you can absorb a knight, and Kirby wears a sword and like a helmet. Or you can absorb an archer, and Kirby has like arrows and stuff. So in a way, the iPad is like Kirby. It's basically nothing. It's like a screen with bezels. And in this case, Myke doesn't like the bezels. Mm-hmm. But the screen and the software that today we think it's boring, and maybe at the time the keynote was not structured so well, but the iPad can turn into multiple things depending on the apps that you use. And an obvious benefit, but also limitation, depending on how you look at it, is that it runs one app at a time. And so that, I think, is mainly, a hardware limitation, but it's also a design decision because, there's no multitasking, there's no split screen. But yeah, it was a strong metaphor. It becomes what you want to use.
The iPad is really thin. It's a 1/2 inch thin. And it weighs just 1.5 pounds. That is thinner and lighter than any netbook.
So can I share something with you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I know we make fun of Myke for having a purchasing problem, but right here, I'm going to tap it. I have an original iPad I bought on eBay. Right here.
Look, I want to now state for the record that where we are in our lives. You are now the one with the problem, not me. Because you are buying, recently, you have been buying so much crazy stuff. And
iPod Classics.
Yep, and then I listened to you on Mac Power Users give a basic inventory of all your old hardware. Like, I buy new, current, dumb things, right, that I play around with and then get rid of them. You buy old stuff that you just put in a closet.
That's not untrue. So I have some thoughts on the iPad hardware. And Jobs introduces it, and Federico, to your point earlier, was definitely crazy thin, definitely crazy light. But again, 5 years later, we know that this thing is gargantuan. It'll be in the show notes, a little photo gallery I've done of this versus an iPad Air 2. And it's sort of shocking how far we've come in not so much time. But holding this thing, it's still, like, if you forgive the weight of it, it's still really comfortable to hold with that curved back, even though it seems weird now. And like you sit it down on the table and it rocks around a little bit. Yeah, it really is a nice looking piece of kit.
I think part of the reason for the curved back was like when they did the iMac. It makes it look thinner.
And it makes it feel thinner, which is, I think, even more important with this, holding it. And look, my thumbs rest on the bezels. This iPad up on eBay has definitely been open, so like the screen sort of clicks in on one side, which is, I'm sure that's fine. But what impressed me when I got this out of the box was really how good the screen is in some certain ways. Yes, it's not Retina. Yes, it's not bonded. Like, you could drive a car in the space between the glass and the LCD. But it looks pretty good. I've done some reading on it. In fact, most of the research for the show I did on this iPad.
Look at you!
Can read on it
really,
fine.
wow, really, like getting deep into the subject.
I will tell you. A lot of modern websites, like it's running iOS 5, really choke on the slower processor, and with only 256 megabytes of RAM, really just like poops out pretty quickly.
Was this the thing that you've been saying that you've been teasing?
Yeah, I've had this. I've been testing this original iPad for several weeks now.
Wow.
But what's really impressive, and I even wrote about it in my review of it back in 2010, is that the screen is really bright, and the IPS. So you can sit this thing down or watch a movie on the bed, and we take for granted now that you can see the screen from almost any angle. Sometimes on like a laptop screen, if you're like laying down and the MacBook's up on a thing, like it looks inverted, right? Because the colors don't don't work correctly from certain angles. But even with this original iPad, the color is so good. You can really read laying down with it like in parallel with you and still see everything. Seems really great.
So I gave my original iPad to my mom, and I think this was like 2 years ago, because she was asking me for a new computer, and I was like, just use my old iPad. And because I'm a terrible son and I didn't want to buy her a new MacBook. So you guys know that I'm into this whole process of finding loopholes to use web services for free, and like web services that you're not supposed to use in Italy, I find ways to keep using them. So back before, when I think Spotify was not officially available in Italy, or maybe it was a thing about like Spotify Radio and Spotify Premium. Anyway, I found a way to let my mom listen to music on Spotify without paying or without using a VPN. And I think a few months ago, she called me and she was like, the music thing on the iPad stopped working. And so I went to check on the iPad, and basically, I think she updated the Spotify app on the App Store on iOS 5. Steven,
Yep.
is that
Yep.
5.1?
iOS 5.
Okay. So she updated the Spotify app, and basically it changed some settings, or maybe like it reset some sort of cache or plist file. The loophole was closed, and she couldn't listen to free music anymore, and she was sad. But it reminded me that the original iPad, I spent like an afternoon trying to understand what was going on, because it's like I set up that system like many months before, and it reminded me of just how nice the original iPad is, but how heavy it is today.
Yeah.
And my mom is still using my original keyboard dock, which I know is an unpopular opinion. I actually kind of love the keyboard dock of the iPad. I'm sorry.
Yes. No. We'll make it back to accessories. So the big story here, though, is the A4, which is Apple's first custom chip. Apple had bought PA Semiconductor before this, and remember, this is pre-iPhone 4. And in reading these reviews, and we've got the Daring Fireball one here, is how people were like blown away by the speed of this thing.
iPad is powered by our own custom silicon. We have an incredible group that does custom silicon at Apple. We have a chip called A4, which is our most advanced chip we've ever done, that powers the iPad. It's got the processor, the graphics, the I/O, the memory controller, everything in this one chip, and it screams. And you can have 16, 32, or 64 gigabytes of flash solid-state storage inside the iPad.
And I will say, guys, yes, sort of the Safari sort of chokes on heavy JavaScript websites, and yes, the RAM is really limiting. Like opening native apps on this and blasting around settings and stuff, the original iPad still feels relatively fast. It's not nearly as fast as a modern iPad, but it's not the same as using a computer that's 10 years old. It holds up, and I think that's a real testament to why Apple did this. This is their first foray into a custom chip, and they say in the keynote, that we get to control the whole stack here, and clearly that pays off in things like battery life.
What is the battery life of this remarkable device? We've been able to achieve 10 hours of battery life in this 1.5-pound device. 10 hours of battery life, which means I can take a flight from San Francisco to Tokyo and watch video the whole way on one charge. It's pretty nice.
A couple other interesting things that I'd forgotten. You could get one up to 64 gigabytes. The 3GS at the time only went to 32, so you get 64 gigabytes of storage. And it launched with 802.11n as opposed to just B and G. So pretty decent wireless out of the box. And what everybody loves, the 30-pin dock connector. I had to use my iPod Classic cable which I had handy because I'm me. But Steve Jobs says, so it plugs into the entire iPod ecosystem. Like in 2010, that's still what it is. But I think most interestingly is that this iPad and my Retina iPad Mini, which is sitting right here next to it, have the same battery life, which of course Jason Snell spoke about. And I don't know about you guys, but I was really impressed. In 2010, laptops were not getting the kind of battery life they do now. So 10 hours just seemed to last forever.
I think it was impressive at the time. I think it should last more today. Especially when you use the iPad like for work, like every day, it seems that the battery is always running out, and I feel like it's been 3 years since the first Retina iPad, and I feel like instead of going after this crazy thinness, even if it's super welcome, like I just wish that at some point they would just go against that self-imposed limit of 10 hours of battery life and just maybe try to do at least 12. It's always that couple of hours that I just wish it had those 2 extra hours to work more or to play more games. And but it was impressive.
And I will say, holding this iPad and thinking about like the Air 2 and even the iPad Mini, I don't think Apple is so much concerned about weight or about thickness as they are about weight. That making these things easier to hold in one hand, like reading iPad reviews, like laying on my couch the last couple of nights on this thing, this is like super first world problem, but it's a heavy device compared to what we have now. I think Apple has been all about making this thing lighter. And the thinness is just sort of a byproduct of that. But I do think Jason is right in his post about, Apple is solving for battery life, and very clearly an iPad is supposed to get 10 hours of battery life, or if it has, this, you could do 3G. Now, of course, you can do LTE. Should have 9 hours. And, that was kind of another thing I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten that the original iPad had 3G. I feel like not a lot of people that I saw at least went with that compared to now. I've got an LTE iPad Mini, and I love having Verizon data on my tablet. But what's also interesting is something else I'd forgotten is that this iPad does not have a camera. There is no there's no camera. Which, the iPad Air 2 event, they talk at length about people taking photos with an iPad. So clearly a lot of change in half a decade.
I think in general about the iPad hardware, Safari was regarded by many as the killer software feature. And I think that overall, the Apple A4 was the killer feature of the iPad hardware. Because yes, it's got this great screen. Yes, it's got battery life. And yes, it's got speakers and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and 3G also. But the killer feature was really the custom silicon made by Apple. Because this is before the iPhone 4. This is the first time that Apple is coming out and saying, we have a silicon team inside Apple and we're doing our custom chips now. And the Apple A4 is controlling every single aspect of the device. And it's not just about the iPad, the original iPad. It's about the story that it pushes forward. That Apple is making its own custom chips. And then in the future, we're going to see even tighter integration between different components and software features at Apple. And I think, when I try to remember this keynote, when I think about the software, I think about Safari. And when I think about the hardware, I think about the iPad and the Apple A4.
I think that's definitely fair, and has obviously played an important role. We would never have the technology inside the Apple Watch if it hadn't been for the course they set out on with this device.
So let's take a quick break and thank one of our sponsors for this week, and that is returning sponsor, our friends over at Automatic. Automatic is a connected car adapter. It plugs into your car's diagnostic port, which is the one that your mechanic will use. Every car since '96 has one of these ports, so you're pretty certain that the car you've got has most likely got one. And then what you do is you plug the automatic in, and it pairs to your phone, and when you drive, it connects your car to the internet. You use the automatic with their free mobile app, which shows you things like if your check engine light comes on, it will explain in plain English what the problem is. You can even clear the light as well in the app if you want. If it's a small problem, you can do that right from your phone. It will take a log of all of your trips and your parking location, so you never lose your car. So you're always going to know. You're never going to like run around the parking lot at Disney World trying to find your car again, because the automatic can help you out with that. And it will give you feedback on your driving to help you drive less aggressively and save on gas. I know people that look at this and they look at their stats and they treat it like a game, right? Trying to get their better scores in safer driving and trying to save fuel, and they use the automatic as a great kind of like way of measuring that information. This is something that's really important. Automatic can even detect a crash and call for help for free. And a human will stay on the line with you until help arrives. It's just like a nice safety feature to have. Automatic can integrate with your Nest thermostat as well. So it can heat your home just in time for your arrival. So your automatic can help warm your living room before you go and watch some iPad keynotes. And it can connect your car to countless other services like Google Docs, Twitter, Evernote, as well as connected home devices like the Philips Hue lights and obviously the Nest that we mentioned just a second ago. Automatic really helps bridge the gap between your car and the tech you use every single day. You can order an automatic right now for just $99.95. There are no subscription fees or any other hidden charges. And we have an incredible deal for you. If you go to automatic.com/connected, you get 20% off an automatic, bringing the total down to just $80. Just that one price, $80, and you'll be able to connect your car to the World Wide Web. It ships in 2 business days for free and has a 45-day return policy. To find out more and for that awesome discount, make sure that you go to automatic.com/connected. Thank you so much to Automatic for supporting this show and Relay FM.
So up next, Scott Forstall.
He's back!
Well, I don't think you know how time works. He's definitely still crazy and like sort of over energetic. So he comes out and is talking about the App Store. So we have Jobs talking about first-party apps, what the iPad comes with out of the box. Scott Forstall is here to talk about the App Store, and of course reveals that an SDK is available. But he leads off with a discussion around, okay, we have all these iPhone apps, and we have this iPad. What's the deal there? And explains how iPhone apps can run on the iPad.
We built the iPad to run virtually every one of these apps unmodified right out of the box. Now, we can do that in 2 ways. We can run these apps with pixel-for-pixel accuracy black boxed in the center of the screen. We can also automatically pixel double and run those apps full screen.
I think this was such a smart move because even though the iPhone apps wouldn't look perfect, what it did was we were talking about earlier about what people expected, like, oh, we're not going to get an SDK today, or we're not going to see an app store today, because people just assumed, well, there's not going to be any apps, and they're not going to release it in 6 months' time. They're going to release it now, so there probably won't be an app store because there'll be nothing to put in it. But the app store, it already was full because you could access all of your iPhone apps. So it meant that you could use your iPhone app that you loved to look at Twitter. You could use it on the iPad. It wouldn't look great, but it would be there. However, I think that this actually helped perpetuate the big iPod Touch problem.
Yeah.
Because you just had big iPhone apps for a while.
I never actually used iPhone apps in this way.
Oh, really?
It's never. It's so weird. Like, I know that iOS still supports this sort of compatibility mode, but it's always been so odd to me. Like, you use a different keyboard and you get this like blurry graphics on the screen. And I guess I'm lucky enough that I didn't rely on apps that didn't have iPad versions on day one, or at least within a comfortable release time from the launch of the device. Like, I'm pretty sure besides like my own personal curiosity that I wanted to see an iPhone app in compatibility mode, I never relied on such a thing ever. not sure about you guys, because Myke, you seem pretty excited about this.
Well, I just thought it was a smart business move.
Yeah, I think it is. It's just weird. Like, I don't know if Apple could have done it better, but it like you get this like the black, extra black bezels around the app.
Even bigger bezels, right?
Yeah, even bigger and softer versions of them. It's just so strange. Like it's almost an Apple, I would say, but I get it. Like it makes sense because the App Store, there's like the risk of not getting the iPad version of the app you're waiting for. And I guess it also makes sense in an enterprise kind of segment because maybe you rely on an iPhone app that it's not yet available on the iPad, but you want to use the iPad, so you get the iPhone version for, because you need it for work. I guess it makes sense. It's just strange.
One thing I think to Myke's point is they sort of had to do this so to take advantage of what had come before it. Even 18 months in, a lot of apps out there, and I think it's important that they did with Facebook because it very clearly a high usage, maybe one of the most high profile iOS apps ever. And so to say, hey, look, all these features you like, you can continue to use. I do think it's interesting that Facebook is an example, but I think, I think they had to, right? They had to say, we have success in this area and we're not going to start back at zero. We're going to build on that success. And so, yes, it's weird. I think it was totally mandatory.
However, interestingly, there was no Facebook for iPad until October 2011.
Yeah, funny story there. I remember basically a lot of people were waiting for Facebook to make an iPad app. And I think I was like, it was a weekend, I'm not sure. I got a tip by a reader about that you could enable Facebook's iPad app by changing like a string of text in the iPhone version from the App Store.
I seem to remember this.
So I was too scared to run with the story on my own because, I didn't want Facebook legal team or whatever writing to me. So I passed the tip along to other people, and the news ended up being reported like within hours.
You are responsible. I remember this. I definitely remember this.
Yeah. It's just like so many people were waiting for the Facebook iPad app. I'm not sure why Facebook didn't release an app like before.
Yeah. Scott Forstall says all it does, you just have to plug it into iTunes and move those iPhone apps right over. So, editing a string in an app bundle, not a big deal. What did you guys think about the Scott Forstall plays this like snowcross game, like you're racing snowmobiles? He's really good at it.
He is really good at it. I think that we need to be checking the snowcross circuit because that's where Forstall might be.
Yeah.
Maybe is live streaming on Twitch.
Yeah. I downloaded it while watching the keynote again because the keynote was so boring the second time. And it's not a bad little game. It hasn't aged very well. Like, it's one of those games, I'm sure you guys know, plays like a 30-second QuickTime movie as it's launching.
Yes.
It's like, and that you can't fast forward in because it's actually loading the app behind the video. It's like, what are you doing? But I played it. So Scott Forstall and I have that in common.
Am I the only one who feels like every time Forstall talks, like he's staring into my soul?
So later on in the video, like the product demo video, that is the video where all of those crazy-eyed Forstall images are taken from.
Yes.
Like, he looks crazy in that video.
Yeah.
It's like next level insanity. That guy, I do miss him though, man. He was good. Like, whenever I see him on stage, it's like he was good.
Yeah, he was good. Yeah.
So they he moves into the SDK and he starts out saying, we rewrote the entire interface of our apps to take advantage of the display. And I couldn't help but point out, it's in the show notes, that not every Apple app was designed. So Contacts, if you guys would look at this link,
God.
Contacts was very clearly meant to work in landscape. So it looked like a book, right? Like to your point of the iPad turns into a physical book, but it was in landscape. They black-barred it at the top and bottom. So this is a
I
book
forgot this.
floating in space.
And I love that this image shows your only contact is Mike Hurley.
What up?
Yeah.
Only
We
one he
know
needs.
details. We know details.
Don't need
And
details
it's
about me,
just
boy.
Mike sitting there in a black sea of nothingness.
That
Wow.
ain't dark.
I mean, I just needed a screenshot, and I wasn't going to sync my iCloud account to this. So, so they talk about this. They demo some third-party apps. I think the one that's most interesting to me, at least, is the New York Times app. So there have been a lot of stories about like the iPad is going to save journalism, which, like, okay, but they really push this, like that the iPad's really great for reading. But what's really interesting to me is that they demo this app after Steve Jobs demos the New York Times website for like 36 minutes.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that before.
It feels very weird to see both of them. And they say an essence of reading a newspaper is like on a 1.5, whatever it was, 1.5 pound glass and metal tablet. But it's like a newspaper in every way.
So I like that because the developers are coming out on stage, and you see these apps that look pretty good. Like they've only had the SDK for a couple of weeks at the most. Can you imagine what it is like to have to develop in this scenario, like to make an app in a couple of weeks, and they got that guy, the brushes guy. I remember that app. Like, it's one guy, right? And then he's like, of everyone that's on stage, he's like, yeah, I'll be out when the iPad ships. Everyone else is like, coming in the future, and he's just like, yeah, no problem, bro. Like, see this like fast forwarding animation? Yeah, I've been dealing with that, so that'll be out when it it's like, okay, buddy.
He probably uses the same energy drink that Scorforcel drinks.
Or you.
No, it's just espresso.
Espresso.
No secret there.
The original energy drink.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think in hindsight, as much as Safari is like the app that defines the iPad, the app stores as well. And John Gruber said that in his review, that the truth is that the app store is the killer app. The iPad is meant for anything that can be represented on a 10-inch color touchscreen. And like that really is true. And you look at even the first party apps, I've got no third party apps on this iPad here, and there's not a lot to it. Like even iBooks was an additional download. And so in hindsight, this thing had to have the app store. And I don't think the iPad really could have existed in a world without it for very long.
Amazon's done a great job of pioneering this functionality with their Kindle. And we're going to stand on their shoulders and go a bit further.
It's a sick Steve Jobs burn right there about Amazon. So I don't know. What do you guys think about iBooks? I mean, what were your reactions at the time?
Okay, I remember. I'm sorry. I needed to point this out. iBooks came with a free download of a kid's book.
Winnie the Pooh, man.
And I was so impressed by the illustrations and like the ebook in general. I thought it was really nice. So I promised myself that I would use iBooks a lot. Because when you try an app and you're impressed and you're like, yeah, I want to use this. And I actually never read in iBooks that much. I guess I like the idea of iBooks. And I like iBooks in general. I publish an iBook myself, so it's not like I'm lying. It's just, I guess I'm not that much of a book reader. And so I was impressed, but just not in practical terms.
I have one comment about this entire section, because this section is this is the extras news fest. Delicious library, man. The most shameless ripoff.
Delicious library, and also there used to be an iPhone app called, I think, Classics. Stephen, do you remember this one?
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah.
Same shelf design. Yeah. I even think the developer himself commented on the iBooks announcement on that day.
Yeah.
On Twitter. Yeah.
Really, though, I mean, I think what really sums up this section is Steve Jobs talking about the user interface between your books and the library.
And probably the best thing is let's go into the store right now. I hit the store button, and it's kind of like a secret passageway. It flips around, and here is the iBook store.
Secret passageway. The whole thing just spins around. It's like, could you get any more, like, not only skeuomorphic, but, like, ridiculous than that?
I actually forgot, like, we all talk about, like, the calendar and the paper ripping off and stuff. This right here is the worst skeuomorphic.
Oh, come on. It's so nice.
It's
like
nice.
one of those movies from, like, there's people touching buttons and they go into secret rooms. It's so...
I'm not
so
saying
weird.
I don't like
it's
it.
So weird.
It's nice, but it's as bad as you could get, right? For skeuomorphism.
Well, no, actually, the original podcast app from Apple.
But I liked that though.
With the radio dial. I mean,
yeah,
the whole
reel
thing,
to reel, man. The reel to reel. But that looked nice. I like that. I did
My
like that.
God.
everything about iBooks is weird. I'm going to put a screenshot in the show notes. When you go to the App Store, it prompted you to download iBooks. It wasn't bundled with the iPad. And the popover is the standard, like, classic iOS popover. But instead of being that nice blue-purple, it's brown. Like, everything about iBooks is just a little bit weird.
I do not remember that.
And what's interesting is they only hint about textbooks. And iBooks Author and sort of iBooks 2.0 didn't take place until 2012, until 2 years after this event. And so, the iBooks, sometimes Apple puts something out and it's very, like, fully formed, especially in hardware. But in software, very often Apple sort of dips their toe in, and the iBook store is definitely one of those things where it's like, hey, we have a couple publishers. I think it even says, we're going to start making deals with more publishers starting tomorrow, and, like, we can do textbooks. But that idea doesn't really take off until a couple years later, and I would argue probably still hasn't taken off, honestly. But the iBooks has been it's a very weird product to me. Looking at Apple's lineup, I understand why they have it, but at the same time, like, if it went away, I for one would not miss it.
Yeah, it's. I forget it exists all the time. Like,
yeah, I read on a Kindle. Like, I don't read in iBooks. I've occasionally, I will buy things like Federico, like your books, or like the Max Sparky Field Guides, like iBook author books. I will read because I kind of have to. But anything else that's available on the Kindle, if I'm going to read it digitally, is where I do it.
You know what also exists in the Apple lineup? iAd. So.
Yeah, it's my favorite.
Oh man, I always forget that.
Yeah,
yeah.
I know.
iBooks isn't the only Apple app that we see here. They move into iWork, and again, like at the top, we we're talking about Steve Jobs at the D conference. Steve Jobs tells us a really nice little story about the background of iWork for the tablet.
A little over a year ago, I asked the head of our iWork team to take a look at creating a version of iWork for the iPad. And the initial reaction was, the iWork apps, Keynote, Pages and Numbers, are really heavy-duty apps. They require a lot of horsepower. Could the tablet power them? And the answer turned out to be a resounding, you betcha.
So Phil Scheller shows off iWork, and he really kind of drives home the idea that they took a lot of time thinking about this, and like they're really like pushing iWork. And I remember seeing it at the time and being like, man, you can do real stuff on this thing, Like that's Pages. Like I've used Pages, and like I think Numbers for me was the most impressive of the demos, because like Keynote, I never really used Keynote, but being able to create like spreadsheets to do all these formulas and stuff on this like touchscreen device seems so cool. And I remember when they showed how the keyboard changed to Numbers, and it only showed the numbers and the functions you needed at that given time. It was like, right, that's why this is so good.
Yeah.
Like it was just like, that makes perfect sense.
He sells it as numbers, the spreadsheet that is fun and cool to use. And
they should have just put his thumb up. Like, he put his thumb up, like,
yeah,
numbers.
I agree with you though, but I think Keynote is pretty impressive too. Just all the layout skills, and actually watching this, I learned things about Keynote that I didn't know until this day, like some of the gestures, which I think is part of the problem with these apps, and it continued in the iLife apps, that came after these. Is that there's a lot of stuff in these interfaces that isn't as simple as some of the other apps. But it is impressive that that these apps were here on day one, because I think Apple had to tell the story that the iPad could be used for productivity.
So that was what was really interesting about iWork, right? It was super powerful, and we got to see, as you said, like you can use it for productivity like it's a thing. And then iLife came in later years, maybe the next year.
The next year, iPad 2, yeah.
And it showed that you could use it for content creation, right? So first Apple shows productivity, then they show content, and then we got iPhoto later on, which was interesting. Didn't go down very well, but it was another app like that.
Yeah, and now it's gone.
Now it's gone, but we can forget about that. So I know that we've spoken about this in the past, but and I felt this way coming out of the last iPad keynote, especially. Where are these apps today? Like, Apple is not showing me today what the iPad can be used for. Like, they're not trailblazing themselves. They're highlighting applications like Pixelmator, but there's I want to see this class of application coming from Apple again. And I'm not saying I have the answers, right? I don't know what you make, but I know this is so hand wavy, but that's kind of not my problem. Like, but I want to see reasons from Apple as to why I should be using the iPad, like that they are showing me, then they're showing other developers, like, this is the kind of stuff you should be making.
I think there's two ways you can go about this. Either you think that Apple has lost its way and that they're being busy doing other things and that maybe they don't prioritize making their own software for the iPad enough. Or maybe you can think that Apple, like initially, they showed developers because they needed to sort of like teach developers how to make iPad software. And then in the following years, they just focused on making, SDK tools to just let the developers and the ecosystem speak for itself. Because they feel like the developers on the iPad and the entire App Store market is now mature enough that we can just focus on making the tools and making the hardware. And you guys, you software is your thing now, and you make apps, and we just make the tools. I don't know, like what's the real reason why Apple is not making this sort of maybe even experimental apps in a way, because with the iPad 2 especially, with GarageBand, that kind of stuff. Today on the iPad, Apple is primarily maintaining those apps and adding new features and adding support for iOS 8 and iCloud Drive and extensions maybe every once in a while, not all the time. I kind of miss, I agree with you, Myke. I kind of miss the Apple that show developers, hey, here's what you can do with the iPad. Here's how we've been, developing apps for the iPad. But I also, I'm torn between these two theories because I understand your point, but I also know that when you're big enough, you can just make the tools and let the community come up with the tools. Also because it's not cool when Apple apps are dominating the charts on the App Store. So I think there's multiple reasons. I the nostalgic part of myself kind of misses the original iWork and iLife suite of apps, but I also kind of understand why they don't do it anymore.
Like, maybe what it is, and I really don't mean this to sound as frustrating or annoying as it is. Like, maybe it's because that there hasn't been a real big defining innovation in the iPad. Like, maybe it is, there are rumors of a stylus or there are rumors of split screen, and maybe we need to wait for something like that, like a big fundamental shift, so that Apple then have something new to make. Like, my thought would be, and I don't think they need to do this, but my thought would be put your money where your mouth is and give me a pro app. Give me Logic, give me Final Cut, right? Something like that, or an element of that. Like, there is an app that they make that is way more powerful. But anyway, that's just my posit. $9.99. Now, what an interesting price. I mean, looking at our document, me and Stephen seem to disagree with this. It was high. It was higher than what other apps were charging at the time. It was higher than iPhone software. Obviously lower than the iWorks apps on the Mac. But I wonder if what Apple were trying to do here was to set the expectation that iPad software should be more expensive.
Yeah, I think that's why we wrote opposite things. Is I was thinking about it from a Mac perspective, where iWork was, I don't know, $69 at the time or something, and so for $30, you get all three. But I think your point is correct as well. Very clearly trying to set the stage that the iPad software is more powerful. iWork did not come to the iPhone on day one. It was reserved for the tablet. And so to say, look, this is a different class. This is an in-between step between your smartphone and your computer, and we're going to price it that way. And I think, in broad strokes, I think that's held up. I don't know for sure, and maybe we can follow up on this, but I think in broad strokes, iPad software is still more expensive than iPhone software in sort of the more professional end of things.
Sure.
And so I think that precedent they set, to a degree at least, is still hanging on.
Although iWork is now free, if that's the canary in the coal mine. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, OS 10 is free.
Everything's free. Let's give it away.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can talk about connectivity real quick. Because this is 2010, this is before the, well before iOS 5 and the PC free stuff. You got to plug it in with a cable, like a gentleman.
The iPad syncs over USB with iTunes running on your Mac or your PC, exactly like an iPhone or an iPod Touch. And so when you sync everything. You can sync your photos, your music, your movies, your TV shows, your contacts, your calendars, your bookmarks, and of course all those applications that you might have already bought for your iPhone or your iPod Touch. Backups are synced back. If you ever lose your iPad and you get another one, you can restore it right from the backup, right where you left off. So USB syncing to iTunes running on your Mac or your PC.
What about 3G? We talked about it a little while ago. Did that surprise you guys that Apple out of the gate had something? Because the iPod Touch to this day still doesn't have cellular data.
I forgot. And because you mentioned earlier, Stephen, that you would kind of had forgotten about it because everybody that you knew didn't have it. And the reason is because it took 90 days. So everybody just bought them with Wi-Fi because none of us could wait.
Yeah.
Right. So there weren't. I don't know if there were a lot of iPads, at least in the nerd circles, that had cellular, because we all just bought them on Wi-Fi. And I mean, as well, I remember. I can't remember the exact timelines off the top of my head, but the iPad came out at the same time in the UK, which was a surprise. Although I think it got delayed a little bit, but it was very close to the US release date. But the cellular version took a while longer, I believe, a much longer time.
Yeah, and I think what's most noticeable about this is that the built-in iPad data plans, which are still around. Of course, now you can just I do on my Verizon plan. My iPad is just $10 a month or something, and just pulls from my pool of data, but. You could do on AT&T, of course. I mean, this is pre-Verizon for Apple. $15 for 250 megabytes or $30 for unlimited data. 250 megabytes is sort of crazy, but then I actually looked on my Verizon account at the usage on my iPad, and I've got some months like this month where I've done a live tethering on my iPad, and the data usage is just insanely high. But there's some months where I might use less than that if you're just looking at Twitter or very little things on the cellular connection. So 250 megabytes, that's sort of kind of funny in hindsight, but I do think that for a lot of people that maybe had been enough.
Well, in my personal example, I almost regularly run out of my 20 gigs of data on my iPad every month.
Well, you're a crazy person.
Yeah, so that 250 megabytes seems so crazy. It's like a single afternoon working on the iPad.
one article.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So we're getting toward the end of it here, and the big bombshell, right, is the price.
What should we price it at? Well, if you listen to the pundits, we're going to price it at under $1,000, which is code for $999. When we set out to develop the iPad, we not only had very ambitious technical goals and user interface goals, but we had a very aggressive price goal, because we want to put this in the hands of lots of people. And just like we were able to meet or exceed our technical goals, we have met our cost goals. And I am thrilled to announce to you that the iPad pricing starts not at $999, but at just $499. $499.
Obviously, there've been a lot of talk about $1,000, right? That's what everybody going into this was expecting. That was because that was what the rumors were, right? And it seemed conceivable at the time that it would be $1,000, and was like, if it's $1,000, that'd be crazy. So whether that information was planted by Apple or not, who knows? It could have been one of those controlled leaks, which I personally think that it probably was.
That's always been my thought, is that Apple set that expectation so they could blow it out of the water.
Because the animation is like a big smashing in the glass, right? They had prepared that. They knew that going in there was a conception of it. I think it was a controlled leak, so they were able to conceivably say $500 is perfectly fine for this device, and people in the tech press could go along and say that, because I think a lot of people, I know that I was really surprised by the price and thought that it was perfectly fair. Not that I don't now, but that was what I thought at the time.
What about this super awesome keyboard dock?
Keyboard dock, man.
What about it?
I wanted one of those so bad.
I owned one.
It was amazing. It is amazing.
We have another dock for the iPad that's interesting. The keyboard dock. So, full-size mechanical keyboard. You slide your iPad into it. Of course, it charges. Has a 30-pin connector out the back for charging. So you can charge your iPad, and when you really need to do a lot of typing, this is the way to go. Just keep one of these in your den. When you've got to write War and Peace, just plug your iPad into it.
Something that the iPad doesn't have anymore, really, or at least in the same way, is that they say that you can use it as a digital picture frame. And so on this iPad here running iOS 5, there's now we have the camera in the bottom right. It was a picture frame thing, and you could set up a little slideshow. And I guess Apple's thought was that this could become sort of like digital picture frame, like it's in the keyboard dock and you're not using it. It's like sitting upright and you can look at family photos or something. And you can still do that in the Photos app. It's obviously not on the lock screen anymore, like clearly demoted in importance.
That was really not required for such prime real estate. I always press that button accidentally, and just stuff I never wanted to show up on that screen was on that screen.
Yeah, it's just, it wasn't selfies on the first iPad because there's no camera, but, iPad 2 and later.
All screenshots for Myke with the origami transition.
Yeah. But I had a keyboard dock. I mean, clearly it's kind of funny in hindsight, I think. But again, I think Apple had to make this transition, and they even say, this is for using with Pages, because it put it in portrait mode. And, it's gone the way of the dodo now. As has this super terrible first gen iPad case, which I owned one, and it was awful. You couldn't get the iPad in or out of it very easily, and it had this little flap that you would never go where you wanted to, and the edges were sharp where the seams were. It's I don't know who made this, but it was terrible. And I think they make fun of it in the iPad 2 event when they introduced the smart cover. I think they're that case we're sorry about that.
Yeah, because they said we don't want to make a case that basically hides your entire device. We want to show the device, but just protect the screen.
Right, and the smart cover, remains to this day. I've got one here on my iPad Mini. Very clearly a superior product to this super gross black, greasy sleeve thing.
I had this weird like plastic like hard case that came with this little like easel thing that you could put the iPad in.
Sweet.
And then I had a little keyboard.
Why are you making fun of my keyboard dock then? You had an easel and the keyboard.
I wanted the keyboard dock. I just never got it because I bought this weird plastic easel thing.
That's no good. So do we want to talk about this Johnny Ive video?
Oh man, this video.
It's really a Scott Forstall video.
That's a good point. That is a really good point. I've seen a lot of these videos, right? I've seen a lot of them. And they're frequently one of my favorite parts of the keynote. This one has two major problems. It is about like 6.5 months long in total. It's still happening. Scott Forstall is still in a box talking. It's just been live streamed to me now, and everyone is way too excited. Everyone is way too excited.
Can I ask you guys a question before we discuss the video?
Yeah.
I need to know this. It's one of those strange questions. Do you think that when they record these videos, the Apple style here is that the people in the video look somewhere else? They don't look directly into the camera. So do you think that they actually look at someone? And if yes, do you think that someone feels weird while they're being talked to?
So I definitely think they're looking at someone because they talk so comfortably.
What is that other someone doing? Just nodding at them?
No, I think whoever that is, I think that it's like going into a nuclear waste plant that you can only be in one of those videos and you have so much exposure to it that you're in a hospital the rest of your life.
Or Steve is just standing there. And it's like, say it with more enthusiasm.
Yeah. So Forstall in particular is like, you just touch it. Like apps are an order of magnitude, like all these crazy clips of like maybe he's on meth. Like I don't know what's going on, but he's so happy.
The you just touch it thing is what I find so crazy. Like we've all used iPhones. Like we know how touchscreens work. Like you just touch it and stuff happens. Like, bro, we get it. Like it's fine. 2 years. Like we've been using these things. Like,
you're like, calm down.
Just like chill out a little bit. But you don't understand. It's glass, and you touch the glass. It's like, all right.
The best part is when he's talking. I think he's talking about Safari, and it's like you can touch the screen, and it feels natural. And then he looks at the guy, I guess, the person he's talking to, and it's like, you just do.
The same reasons that it just feels right to hold a book or a magazine or a newspaper in your hands as you read them, it just feels right to hold the internet in your hands as you surf it. And with a screen this large, you can just see more of the web as you're surfing it. Take the New York Times. You can see all the top stories. They're all just right there. If you see something, you just reach out and tap it. It's completely natural. You don't even think about it. You just do.
And he has so much excitement in his voice.
It's so bad.
I miss the guy.
Because the other thing,
I really miss him.
with it being 8 minutes, like it's effectively just telling us everything we've already watched. Like, we just see it all over again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, remember, like for a long time, Apple didn't always put these keynotes out quickly, and so you'd have the product video, and I mean, nerds are going to watch an hour-long keynote, but someone who's just interested in the product is only going to watch a 6-8 minute thing.
Oh yeah.
So I get why they have to repackage it.
Yeah, but you don't need to put the 8-minute video inside the keynote. Then I think you could have a shortened version and then keep the 8 minutes. Anyway, this is the company that shows TV commercials during keynotes. That's
like
a good point.
Steve Jobs is like, "Hey, we made an ad," and they play the ad, and everyone is happy. Like it's just weird. I do like that we get to see Big Bob Mansfield, who left Apple, retired, and then came out of retirement, then I think is retired again, talking about the hardware.
What is he doing?
I think he only came back to eject Scott Forstall out of the building.
Maybe.
Like,
yeah, he's the only guy like big enough to handle that amount of energy.
Big Bob just bounced him out.
And Phil Schiller has a good point at the end of it, and I think that in many ways it encapsulates everything we've talked about for the last 12 hours, is that new technology usually starts as an expensive, top-shelf type of thing. And over time, it comes down, and the price comes down, and the technology becomes more accessible. And he says with the iPad, Apple wanted to do it differently. And I really believe that thought process behind that statement of, Apple, clearly they could have charged $1,000 for this, right? Like, and people would have bought it. But making it $499, put it in reach of so many people, and $499 for some people is almost like compulsion. I mean, it's not no money, but it's enough of a price difference from a laptop that clearly setting this device apart, and Apple wanting the A4 and the screen and the software to be accessible to as many people as possible. I think that's really profound, and I think it's something that Apple has gotten better at over time. Even though the iPad is still $499, dropping those price points by selling old models, as gross as that is sometimes, like clearly they're still in that mission of this technology should be accessible to anyone who can afford it, and we want as many people to be able to afford it as possible. And I think that's pretty great.
Do we have what it takes to establish a third category of products? An awesome product in between a laptop and a smartphone? Well, the bar is pretty high. It's got to be far better at doing some key things like these. And we think we got the goods. We think we've done it. And we are so excited about this product. Another thing we're so excited about is that because we've shipped over 75 million iPhones and iPod Touches, there's over 75 million people that already know how to use the iPad. So we can't wait for them to get their hands on it.
So Steve is closing by really answering the question that he asked at the beginning of the event. Can a third category of device sitting between the laptop and between the smartphone make sense? Could it work? And he says we think we've got something that is a good compromise, I guess, between all the different categories, but not just a compromise between a laptop and a smartphone. Really, it excels at some key tasks that people want to do on this kind of device. And multiple times he's talking about the iPad as an intuitive, as an easy and fun device to use. The word fun is used many, many times throughout the show to either to refer to the iPad as something that you hold in your hands and you can carry around and use wherever you want, and also to the software being fun and being, almost realistic in a way that you already know how to use these apps. And also another recurring theme that it repeats in the conclusion of the keynote is that the iPad fits the user. You don't have to adjust yourself to use the device because of the screen, because of the form factor, and because it's something that you carry with you all the time, and because of the battery life, because it lasts for 10 hours. The iPad fits your lifestyle, and you can just rely on the apps to get work done, or to watch movies, or to listen to music, and to your music collection, as he says on your device. And now, what comes next from Jobs is a quote that we see played over and over in the Apple blogs, and it's about what he calls the intersection of technology and liberal arts.
Now, the reason that Apple's able to create products like the iPad is because we've always tried to be at the intersection of technology and liberal arts. To be able to get the best of both, to make extremely advanced products from a technology point of view, but also have them be intuitive, easy to use, fun to use, so that they really fit the users. The users don't have to come to them. They come to the user. And it's the combination of these two things that I think has let us make the kind of creative products like the iPad.
This one sentence destroys the entire thing for me because I hate this term more than anything in the world.
Why?
Because what happened was Steve Jobs said something really cool, and he had to put a graphic up. And I don't hate what Jobs said. I hate what came afterwards. Was everyone, everywhere, being at the intersection of something. They're at the intersection of something of something. Like this show is at the intersection of show notes and photo management.
Did you say show notes and photo management?
It really is, by the way.
Like, it's just so annoying. Like, every Apple podcast for like 6 years was at the intersection of something and something.
Yeah. Hey, guys, I'm going to eat a burrito after this, and it's going to be at the intersection of deliciousness and pain. Like,
I hate this so much.
Yeah. So, okay, I'll give you that. It's been overplayed, but I do think it's interesting, and I think in many ways, Jobs had a couple keynotes after this. But I think in many ways, this slide really sums up his view of Apple as not only a company, but as a force in the world. And again, like the iPad is clearly, he's building the case that the iPad also stands at this intersection. But I really think it's sort of a meta statement about Apple itself. And, one, I think that you can really see, I mean, even if you go back to the first Jobs era of, Jobs spent a lot of time trying to put Apple computers in classrooms and making them really accessible for lots of people. Even the original Macintosh, stripping away all of the things that weren't necessary to make it a useful tool for people who want to be creative and people who wanted to be able to write and make things with a computer. And so I think this intersection of technology and liberal arts is something that I think that was very close to Steve Jobs. I think it's still very close to the heart of Apple. This idea that technology can make the world better, and not just in a way that's like economic or in a way that is sort of technology for its own sake, but for technology for like the sake of humanity. And like that's sort of ridiculous to talk about like a company that way, but I think it's true, and I think it's why so many people resonate with this stuff, so well.
This week's very special episode of Connected is brought to you by our friends at Igloo, the internet you'll actually like. Igloo's internet works on any device, any mobile device, including the iPhone and the iPhone 6, any mobile device, including the iPad, or any mobile device, including your MacBook, because they are mobile devices. They're all mobile devices in this Apple universe, and Igloo's internet platform works on all of them. It's because it features responsive design, so you can do anything from reading a document to sharing a photo of your lunch to administrating the intersection of your settings and your tasks. Igloo's document preview engine is fully HTML5 compatible, so if your teammate uploads a Word, Excel, or even JavaScript file, you can read it on your device without having to download the content or use a native app. It saves you storage and also makes sure that everyone on your team is looking at the same version of a document because its one true place is on the web. Even Igloo's task management system has been designed for speed and ease of use on your iPhone. You can very quickly, very easily create a task, just a few taps it takes, and you can quickly manage all of your lists wherever you are. Igloo's platform is so customizable. When you design your Igloo to look exactly how you want, maybe it carries your logo and the colors and the fonts that you want, it's going to look fantastic on every device because it's going to carry that design over from phone to laptop to iPad instantly. It's a fantastic and fast way to create, share, and manage your work from wherever you choose to work. Whether you want to work on the Alps, you want to work in a cubicle, you want to work on the road. Federico is known for working in the front seat of a car. You can do all of that with Igloo, and this is amazing. If you've ever used any kind of intranet product before, like SharePoint, you'll know how incredible this sounds because it's just simply not possible to do with anybody else. Igloo is free to use with up to 10 people, and you can sign up right now at igloosoftware.com/connected. We love these guys, and they love us, so you should love them. So thank you so much to Igloo for supporting this week's show and all of Relay FM.
So I think in hindsight, watching this keynote a couple of times, talking about it with you guys today, I think what really jumps out at me is that Steve leads this keynote with software for a reason. And I think that's really true. That resonates across, I think, a lot of Apple's products that, Apple, it's been said, is a software company first that happens to make hardware. And I think that's definitely the case when it comes to the iPad. And that's why things like the hardware sort of just being really minimal and being very simple, why that's so important, especially on the iPad. And I think that's why Jobs starts with the interface, and doesn't lead off with things like, look how crazy thin this is. You know, they do that now more because people understand it, but especially early on, leading with the software, I think, was a really good way to go. And I think was really important to the iPad being understood by people watching.
I think, you know, I said this before, and like the way that I look at this event as a whole, Steve did like a really good job of showing you what the iPad's purpose is. Like, why do you need the iPad? What are you going to do with it? You know, he even says like it has to be better at these tasks when referring to email, reading. Like they really show like this is what the iPad is for. This is what we see it to be for. They had apps that came out to show that. I feel like Apple lately has maybe done not a good job of it, or maybe there's something that needs to change, or I don't know what it is, but I feel myself asking the question, like, what do I need an iPad for? And I don't use an iPad anymore. Like, I simply don't use it. Like, for the last few weeks, I haven't even had an iPad in this house because I borrowed mine to my girlfriend. And I don't feel that as a problem in any way. And the reason, the main reason why I think that that's interesting is, as I was watching this keynote, I wanted to buy an iPad so bad. And I was considering going to buy an Air 2 because Steve Jobs was sitting on stage, and I was like, yes, I can do all of that. I can sit in a seat like that and do my email. But like half an hour after the keynote had finished, like I finished watching it, that went away again because I started to think about the fact that I don't use an iPad. So you can show me that there's a use for it, but I don't think that personally, I don't feel that it's evolved over time. I think the original iPad introduction was fantastic at showing us why we needed one. But I think as time has gone on, there are edge cases. I have the pleasure of talking to an edge case multiple times a week. But I think for the majority of people, the iPad has not adapted from what the original introduction was.
And of course, I disagree there. And not just because I'm an edge case, but because I think the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, the iPad has been Apple's fastest selling device, like ever. And yes, it's been slowing lately, but that also coincides with Apple not making, at least not telling a very compelling story about the device. And I think that, like, the way I see it, the iPad keynote, the original iPad announcement, for me, at least, it's like the last keynote of the old computing era. Like, there's before, not just about the iPad, but there's before this keynote and after this keynote, in a way that, again, this is not strictly about the iPad, but also other companies and just, I guess, the industry in general. There's the iPad, I think, started this kind of a massive change about just making everything mobile, even more so than what the iPhone did and what the original iPhone did. But just maybe it's that maybe the iPad didn't exactly play itself a big role in this, and maybe it was just the iPad accelerated an existing process. But after 2010. I think that people's workflows and like the way that people use devices, like electronic devices and computers, it has shifted quickly to a mobile-centric kind of lifestyle. And for me personally, the iPad it's been a huge change. So much that I don't use a computer anymore except for doing this, like Skype every week. But the way that, like, what the iPad represents more than what the iPad is, I think it's important for me. Because it shows like these tasks, these key things that Jobs talks about, moving from computers to mobile devices. And yes, they've been moving already with the iPhone, but I think the iPad made a better example out of this transition from an era, from the old computing era, from spreadsheets and old computer stuff becoming new again on a mobile device. And I think, to Apple's credit, all these tasks that were transformed by Apple into apps, like the spreadsheet becoming, a multi-touch experience with numbers. Most of these apps that landed on the iPad didn't come to the iPhone until 2 years ago. So they were iPad only for a couple of years. And so maybe the iPad itself and iOS itself on the iPad is not a huge revolution. But what the iPad represents as a trend, as an overall change, I think that's massive. That's been a massive change in the industry and a massive change in the minds of people. Even if they don't actually use the iPad, even though millions of people do, I think the message is even more important than the device. And the message that Steve Jobs is saying, that we're now in a post-PC era, that's even stronger than the practical benefit of the original iPad as a device.
So I want to go back to something that you said right at the start, which was about the iPad being the fastest selling device. It's interesting to me. I know the fact is true, but I think that it's kind of a misnomer, because 2010 Apple was very different, and it was the biggest new product they released. So I don't really have much to say. Just I think that number for me doesn't necessarily tell anything, because Apple from 2010 to now is very different to Apple previous. And I would say any new product that Apple releases will always sell incredibly well, incredibly fast.
No, I'm not sure.
That's what I mean. I'm not saying, like, I think about that. Like, I don't know where, I feel like I'm not 100% set in this. It's just something I ponder about. And I guess really the only way that we'll know is if the Apple Watch then becomes the fastest selling Apple device of all time. If that's the case, I think it would show something.
Well, I think the iPad was able to do that. It sold quicker than the iPhone, but I think there are a couple of factors to that. I think, one, the iPad clearly stood on the success of the iPhone. People understood what it was for, how it worked. And it was less expensive in many cases, and there was no contract involved. And so I think the iPad was sort of positioned to do that better than anything else. I think you're absolutely right. I think the watch is the next thing in that line. Like MacBooks, Mac Pros, never going to do that. But I think if anything could, it'd be the watch. I don't think it will. But I think that it's the next sort of item in line that could do it. I think to Federico's point, I think the iPad did change a lot of things. I think that it did lead this push into mobile. And there's something that gets quoted a lot that Steve Jobs said at D8, which we opened with. This quote that's very well known, and like the intersection quote is brought up a lot.
Is the tablet going to be eventually replace the laptop, do you think? There are a lot of people who say, well, you'll never do content creation on it, for instance. Talk about what you think, where it's going. Not just the iPad, but the tablet itself as a form factor.
I'm trying to think of a good analogy. When we were an agrarian nation, all cars were trucks, because that's what you needed on the farm. But as vehicles started to be used in the urban centers, and America started to move into those urban and then suburban centers, cars got more popular, and innovations like automatic transmission and power steering and things that you didn't care about in a truck as much started to become paramount in cars. And now, probably, I don't know what the statistics are, maybe 1 out of every 25 vehicles, 30 vehicles is a truck, where it used to be 100%. PCs are going to be like trucks. They're still going to be around. They're still going to have a lot of value, but they're going to be used by 1 out of X people.
And when you say PC, just so I'm clear, it's not PC versus Mac.
I mean personal
computers, and you're including laptops and desktops.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this transformation is going to make some people uneasy. People from the PC world, like you and me. It's going to make us uneasy because the PC's taken us a long ways. It's brilliant. And we like to talk about the post-PC era, but when it really starts to happen, I think it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. And because it's change, and a lot of vested interests are going to change, and it's going to be different. So I think that we're embarked on that.
But I wonder how that quote holds up, because Federico, I hear what you say, that the iPad has changed the way people think about computers, and I think that's absolutely true for a lot of people. But then I look around at my job, and I look around at even my own personal use, and the world still runs on computers with keyboards and mice, and it still runs on desktops and laptops. And yes, absolutely, there are people who can do it on a tablet. You being the king of those people. And I don't mean to say that to discount anything you've done, but I think that out in the real world, the iPad is maybe more of a philosophical change than an actual change. Tablets aren't, even non-iPad tablets have not made a big impression in the workplace. And depending on how you look at the data, may have made a big impact in education, but now, according to some people, are losing out to things like Chromebooks. And so while I do think the iPad moved the bar, I don't think it's held its ground. And I don't think that in another 5 years that my company of 20 people, I don't think we're all going to be doing our work on iPads. We're still going to be doing them on laptops. And so I wonder, I don't think the cars and truck analogy is a bad one, but I think that it's one that Jobs either it hasn't come true yet, which I'm willing to concede that I could just be early in my condemnation of it, or it's something that he didn't quite get right in hindsight.
Well, see, even you and me, or the workplace, we're just a fraction of the real world. Because I recognize that what I do is a bit strange, and because most people don't want to work exclusively on an iPad. But even you and your job, and maybe the people I know, we don't represent the world, right? We're just a small corner of this industry, and we cannot account for those stories of entire classrooms switching to iPads, or maybe for instance in developing countries, kids and people, and again classrooms or maybe offices using iPads because they're so accessible and cheap.
I don't think it's happening in offices. I spend my day in and out of companies,
but in America,
far bigger than mine, and
only in America.
Sure, but yes, I will put that as an asterisk, that only in America. But in major corporations, it's not. The iPad, if anything, is supplementing the desktop, but it is not replacing it. And again, it might just be early. It might be that once iPads are more powerful, or you can develop on an iPad, maybe it makes a bigger inroad. But currently, I think at best, the tablet is a supplement to the existing, mostly Windows infrastructure that businesses still run on. And Jobs doesn't mention businesses in this keynote. That's a new thing that Apple's trying to go after. But I think even that said, with bring your own device, I don't think the iPad has spread much bigger than just the individual consumer and maybe education.
What I'm trying to say is that because the iPad hasn't taken off in the business and the enterprise, it doesn't mean that the tablet cannot change the world. And And with all due respect, it's not just referring to your office or to Mike's previous office. It's just in general. I think more than anything else, this is the kind of change that comes from the bottom, not from the enterprise, not from office managers deciding to use Windows or Chromebooks instead of iPads. I think it's a change from the people. It's a change of parents using iPads because computers are too complex, or it's a change of kids growing up playing games on the iPad and eventually writing college essays on the iPad. And it's a change from a classroom in India using an iPad instead of a textbook. It's a change from people, not from office workers. And I genuinely believe that, not because I want to somehow justify my investment in the iPad as a device that I use. I think that, and again, it's not the iPad, it's the tablet in general, the iPad being the kind of tablet that we happen to discuss. I think that the tablet as a touch device, that it's portable and that it doesn't depend, on a keyboard and all these other accessories and ports. I think that's a kind of change that doesn't happen in a business environment. It's a kind of change that happens in normal people, in casual people, and that gradually extends to businesses and offices. And
so one of the things that I saw in my previous company, the company didn't support iPads, at least at that time, and that would be something that I knew was going to come, and they were going to, like with the bring your own device thing that I have spoken about in previous episodes. But what I saw quite a bit of, and there were always more people doing it. It wasn't lots and lots and lots, but there will always seem to be more people doing it, was to have an iPad with them that they took notes on. And that seemed to be, it was never a prevailing thing, but the longer I was there, the more people I saw doing that. And so I agree with you, Federico, to a point. Like it's something that these things, and it was the same with the iPhone initially, and how the iPhone broke into the enterprise in the first place, is these things come from a groundswell, and it's like people start doing them. So eventually the company has to support them because enough executives decide that that's the way that they want to go. And that's where like the whole BYOD program comes from. It's tablets as well as iPhones. But one of the big problems is they will most likely in most big companies, they may be used, but they'll only be used for some tasks, probably not all tasks, because I don't imagine a world where legacy software is ever going to be ported to iOS devices. So if a company uses some sort of legacy system to do something, it probably will remain that way, especially where Windows remains a prevailing architecture in an organization. The most you're ever going to get is visualization, and it doesn't work. It's not going to work at scale to try and use Windows XP on an iPad via a VPN or some sort of virtualization. But I do agree that I think that as we go through into history, like these a lot of tasks in these businesses will get taken over by iPads. But I don't imagine a lot of large companies being able to completely switch over ever.
Yeah. So what about the iPad itself? I mean, we're kind of talking about the tablet in general, but what do the next 5 years hold for Apple's tablet? I mean, clearly there's some obvious ones: thinner, lighter. We've talked a lot about a bigger iPad on this show, but what do you guys want out of the next 5 years of iPads?
More RAM.
Yeah, amen, brother.
I feel like maybe Stephen, me and you should ask, and then we separate Federico's wants into a whole new podcast series.
Yeah.
But, like for me, I can't quantify what I want from the iPad. I just know that I don't really use one enough, and I don't know what that could mean for me. Like I don't know what I could need to see that the iPad becomes like this really important thing. Like if I could, I don't know, man, maybe if I could genuinely believe that I could properly record podcasts on it, like it could power, like if we saw more lightning microphones, so we could have a really good quality microphone that's powered by the lightning port. And that's something that could potentially happen. And then maybe if there's more like really powerful looking software, or maybe if Apple decides to embrace podcasting in the second renaissance that we're in, and really and maybe make their own. Maybe that's an app they could make, right? A podcast app. But yeah, so I don't know. I think I just need, for me personally, I need more places where I can practically apply an iPad to my life, where the Mac, where it's better than the Mac, and for a lot of those things I don't see, because my iPhone does such a great job. Maybe I need my iPhone or my iPad to be more different in some way.
I think, especially looking back at the keynote, with a slide of a MacBook and an iPad and an iPhone, I think 5 years later, looking back at that slide feels like it makes the iPad look not as something that can be your only device, but something that comes after the MacBook, and that's also before the iPhone, in a way that you cannot rely solely on the iPad. And sometimes, even though I don't use my MacBook, I still have to use my MacBook for some tasks. And like 5 years later, I wonder how many people at Apple can work only on an iPad. Or if maybe they still see the iPad as something that you use in addition to a MacBook. So from the next 5 years of the iPad, I would like to see Apple doing the kind of changes that can allow everyone to use an iPad as their only device. Just like an iPhone can be used as your only phone computer in your pocket. Because, I mean, you're not buying multiple phones, you're not buying multiple pocket computers, but today you cannot do everything on an iPad. It's still a problem. I shouldn't have to use a Mac to record on Skype. I shouldn't have to use a Mac for iTunes stuff that Apple still hasn't brought to the iPad. I shouldn't have to use a Mac to listen to louder music because the speakers are better. And I shouldn't use a Mac because it has more RAM or because it has more, other like ports that let me connect accessories. So, like, I get it. Some tasks are exclusive to people like developers and power users. But I think that the iPad still has plenty of room for improvement for everyone, not just for people who do podcasts about Apple or who release apps on the App Store. The iPad, in many ways, like, for me, it's been a massive change, but it doesn't mean that it cannot get better. So it's still painful often to switch between apps and have the apps lose your place because they've been ejected from memory. Or the fact that I mentioned before that I cannot really go a full day without charging my iPad at least, once or a couple of times in the afternoon. And when it comes to the software, which is really, the core of the iPad experience, Apple has been doing a lot of things with iOS 8 and letting apps communicate and all of that. But it still takes me quite a few taps or, manual switching between apps when I want to do stuff that on the Mac will only require me 2 clicks. So after 5 years, I'm thinking about myself first, because 5 years ago I launched a website about Macs, and 5 years later the website is still there, still the same name, but I don't really use a Mac anymore because I work from the iPad. So I have like this sort of personal arc of like I'm going from watching the iPad keynote and today I work on my iPad. So that's been nice. And that's been like cool to witness, like the kinds of apps that have been released on the iPad and all that. But also have my questions and hopes for the iPad being granted. Has the iPad changed the world? Has the iPad changed the tech industry? Can the iPad be a computer for everyone and for everything. And I think that the question is no, that there's still work to do. And so in 5 years, Apple has done has been releasing software changes and apps and hardware revisions that have done a good amount of work in that regard. The next 5 years, I think it'll be the hardest part for Apple to do the remaining aspects of the iPad. Can this become a real computer for everything and everyone? Not just the workplace, not just the casual user, and not just these kinds of apps, and not just these kinds of features, but just everything and everyone. And that's still up in the air.
Well, that about wraps up this very special episode of Connected. I think the sad thing, guys, is we can't do this again for like 5 years.
Oh, well, it depends, because we can do 5 years of the iPhone 4 this year.
That's a good point. Let's just go
we can
for
go
that
old.
next.
5 years of Retina display this year. So
We could do the 17-year anniversary of the Power Mac 8800.
On that note, thank you so much to our sponsors this week, our good friends at Igloo, our friends at Automatic, and our friends at Lynda. Thank you all for listening. We love to put these episodes together, and we hope that you'll love listening to it as much as we love making it. If you want to find us online, there's a few places that you can do that. Stephen is freaking out in our group chat right now. Would you like to, just before I wrap up, would you like to correct yourself?
There was no Power Mac 8800. I'm sorry if I misled you.
Okay, just thought I'd let you do that before you have to is it seppuku, the samurai thing where you stab yourself with your own sword?
wow, nice one, Mike.
Where can people find? Can we just go back to the part before I said silly things?
Of course we can. We're all on Twitter. If you'd like to find Mr. Stephen Hackett, he is at ISMH, and Federico's at Viticci, Viticci, and I am at iMyke, IMYKE. If you'd like to find the mammoth show notes for this week's episode, point your browsing of the web application and go to relay.fm/connected/24. And guys, you can hold it in the palm of your hands if you want to. If you want to find our work in other places on the internet, you can find Stephen at 512pixels.net, Federico at macstories.net, and of course I have many more shows over at relay.fm. And don't forget to check out Rocket, one of our new additions to Relay FM. It's a great show shaping up to be very, very awesome to listen to. You should check that out. Thanks so much for listening to this very special episode, and we'll be back next time. Say goodbye, gentlemen.
Arrivederci.
Adios.
All this power and this much fun and the internet in your hands, you'll never want to go back. So thank you so much for coming this morning, and we hope you love the iPad as much as we do. Thank you very much.